Hello, everybody. I would like to welcome all of you to the first episode of the Josh Warner Show. I am your host, Josh Warner, and today we are going to be going over the entirety of the NHL offseason. I'm currently sitting here on July 3rd recording this. I thought when I'd planned this ahead of time, I planned this. We're going to record on July 3rd. Everything for the offseason should be done. I didn't exactly anticipate that Nikolai Ehlers would not have signed a contract yet. But we got what we got. We got what we got, which is honestly a great way to explain the entirety of this offseason. But before we actually get into talking about the hockey aspect of things, with this being the first episode of the show, I kind of just wanted to make a bit of an introduction here, explain what I want the show to be, explain a little bit about myself, a little bit about my background in as big of quotations as I can possibly give, and then we will get into the hockey talk for this summer. But yeah, so this is a brand new podcast. I know it's a completely original concept. Somebody who is really just a fan of the sport of hockey is, set up his phone and gotten a microphone and is going to start talking about hockey on the internet, Yes, all the qualifications are there. I've been wanting to do this for a bit. For those who are watching this on the YouTube side of things, because I'm pretty sure this is going to be posted as a podcast on other platforms, but for those of you who are watching on the YouTube side of things, you may remember me. I made content a couple years ago. I mainly made Oilers-based content back then, but then, kind of out of nowhere, I just kind of disappeared. And everything I'm doing now, starting up the show and the format I'm going to be running with, is kind of my attempt to avoid that from happening again. A big reason as to why I kind of stopped making content a couple years ago. I do apologize. I just adjusted the volume on my microphone. I saw it was kind of spiking out a bit. But a part of the reason I stopped making content was just because I got burnt out. I was still in high school at the time, and I was, as a kid in Ontario, making YouTube videos after every single one of the Oilers games taking place at 9 or 10 at night. It led to exhaustion, it led to burnout, and it just kind of led to me quitting entirely. So now I'm coming back trying to do more of a podcast format where, I can sit down every couple of weeks, say, and talk about hockey for a couple of hours on my own schedule, kind of fitting it into when I actually have time to sit down and be somewhat creative with my time. So that kind of lays out what my plan is for this podcast going forward. I don't plan to be doing, multiple episodes a week, especially throughout the summer here. I don't plan on being the guy who is doing, we're going to do 3 podcasts a week and we're going to drive ourselves into the ground. No. This is going to be more so of a, take a couple weeks, see what's going on in the hockey world, and come together with one big compiled video, podcast, I should say, to just kind of talk about everything and have a bit of a good time. So, hopefully. So, with all that being said, really how the show's going to work, they'll probably, it's, at least the way I envision it going forward, we'll have a few smaller little news bits off the top, like, smaller stories that still have significance, but can't really be like full-on deep dives on their own, and then one big deep dive to talk about for the majority of the episodes. So with all that being said, like I said, welcome to the show. Hope you all enjoy what we have to offer here. Let's jump into the hockey talk. Let's jump into what you're here to see. It's been a pretty interesting offseason. Really, there's been a lot of different aspects that we've seen play out since the Florida Panthers eliminated the Edmonton Oilers in 6 games in the Stanley Cup Finals. And one aspect that I think was talked about for a bit, but then very quickly went under the radar, was the new CBA. And I do think it's actually important to go over this CBA because I do think taking a look at how some of the things that are written into this contract, um, I think it is really important to talk about it because it did impact a lot of the moves that we saw happen around the draft and free agency time. It did impact it, whether it be rules that are being changed that teams want to get players under contracts that maybe won't be as like won't be allowable under the new CBA, and stuff like that. So the NHL CBA was announced formally on draft night of night one of the draft. It is a 4-year extension to the CBA, which will keep the NHL in play through the 2029-2030 season. And there is obviously a lot of details on it, but I've just mainly stripped out a few of the more interesting ones to me. And again, some of these are interesting with hindsight on the offseason. First things first, we are getting 2 more games in the regular season. I believe what's happening is we are moving from an 82 to an 84 game regular season, and I believe the preseason is now going to be limited to only 4 games, and NHL players from the year before are limited to 2 games per. I believe there is a game like number there on if you played this many games the year before, you can only play 2 preseason games. But yeah, honestly, I can see why they're moving to 84 games. With 32 teams in the league now, um, divisional play, for example, if you are only playing teams in your division, um, like I think it was like most teams were 4, but a couple teams only played 3, and I believe it kind of balances itself out now to where you can play every team in your division 4 times, every team in the other division in your conference 3, and every team in the other conference twice. So I think it's just one of those balance out things for the league. Also, I'm okay with shortening the preseason. It does get players more um like into game shape for sure, but also it really does feel like when you're getting into preseason game 5, 6, or 7, it really does feel like you're just starting to drag things out a bit. I think that having a 4 game preseason is okay. It gives you a nice enough launching point into the regular season, and you can get going with the actual games. Just kind of get through the season quicker because we saw it this year. There was only what a week and a half between the Stanley Cup Finals and the draft. You need more time than that, I think. There needs to be a bit better of a structure. So I credit the NHL for moving to 84 games if it can help. I know the irony in making the season longer to shorten things up. I hope it can help a little bit with that. Anyways, the second thing, max contract lengths have been lowered down to 7 years, and the max UFA length will be 6. Again, that actually played a role in a lot of things because you had players sign those 8-year contracts this year. You had players sign those longer term deals because, well, you're not going to be able to get an 8-year deal anymore after this season. I understand why they're doing this. This is a page out of the NBA's playbook. Because the NBA, their max contract length, I believe it's only 5 years, is the maximum contract length that you can get. And even then, you have to be re-signing with your team like the NHL with the 8-year. You have to be re-signing with your team to get that 5th year. UFAs can only get 4 years in the NBA. So, knowing that, I do see why they're doing it. It helps the players out a bit. I know, again, players probably like signing those 8-year deals and saying, ooh, look at that. I'm getting a lot of money. Mitch Marner probably has no problem with the fact he's going to be making $96 million instead of, if it was a $12 million deal at 7 years, 84. He probably has no problem with that at all. But at the same time, if you are, let's say, a younger player, let's say that you are a 21-year-old who was a top 5 pick a few years ago, you've been running through the league, you only have to sign you can sign a 7-year max deal, which will bring you right till you are 28 years old. And then if you choose to leave your team at that point, you sign a 6-year deal that brings you to 34. And then, looking at the league this year, the revival of paying, the older guys in the league a lot more money. It's a bit of an old guy revival, as has been said. You have an opportunity to cash out at 34, sign another 6-year contract until you're 40. It really does just help players make more money. I think that as a more player-friendly thing than it is team-friendly thing necessarily. this is a big one as well. The playoff salary cap has been implemented. We know that the LTIR loophole has been talked about by a lot of teams. In a way, it's kind of been replaced by another gripe. We'll get to a little bit later on when talking about how free agency played out. But yeah, we'll have a playoff salary cap now. So you can't be one of those teams that has a player on LTIR and then brings them back for the playoffs for game one. We saw Vegas do this a lot. We saw Tampa do this a lot during their cup runs as well with guys like Kucherov, Mark Stone for Vegas. And other teams are guilty of it as well. I'm not just picking on the team from Florida and the team from Vegas. I'm picking on everybody equally because most teams were like guilty of it. The Oilers were guilty of it with Evander Kane, where I'm not claiming anybody wasn't hurt, but a player suspiciously is not able to play game 82 of the regular season, but is able to play game 1 of the regular season of the playoffs. I mean, Chicago even did this during their cup runs as well. But now that is different. There's a playoff salary cap introduced. The rule is that your lineup that you dress for every game in the playoff, it has to be a cap compliant lineup. When you add up the salary cap, it has to be cap compliant. I'm in favor of this. I think it just helps the league with a bit more parity, I think, which is something that, weirdly enough, while it does seem like there are a lot of teams that are good, the past 2 years, league parity has been exposed. There was a time there where it looked like, all right, all these teams are starting to get really good and loaded up. But the past 2 years, we've had the same two teams in the finals. And yes, Florida and Edmonton are both great teams. Not saying that they are not saying that they are the result of a weakened league. I'm just saying you've got two teams making the cup final in back-to-back years. It does kind of show that maybe some of the other teams in this league are a little bit behind. Another thing, bit more of a minor note here, player rights remain with the team that drafted them until 22. I believe before, the rules were a little bit more all over the place, where if you drafted a player from the CHL leagues, 20. College players were like 22 or 20. Like, there is now a standard of 22 years old, which is, I think, a lot easier to navigate. Also, for it helps the CHL guys as well, and maybe that's a bit like me speaking as a kid who grew up going to OHL games and has always paid attention to the CHL leagues, but sometimes these kids, they're not ready to go to the NHL or the CHL. Maybe they need another couple of years to go play in like the USHL or something like that. This gives those guys the opportunity to do so. Signing bonuses are capped at 60% of contracts. This is another one that played a role in this offseason because Mitch Marner's contract that he signed, if I'm not mistaken, that thing is signing bonus loaded to the brim. That contract would not be legal under the next CBA. A lot of guys signed salary bonus heavy contracts. Signing bonuses will be capped at 60%. So you're going to have to start paying more of that money out throughout the year. This is going to hurt some teams. I think about teams, how should I put this? This is going to hurt the teams that sign contracts with the hopes of shipping them off in their final years to avoid paying money on them. I look at, there was a time where Arizona was known for swooping up all these like bad contracts where the cap hit would be high so they could hit the salary floor, but the actual money spent would be low because bonuses were paid out and then the players were traded on July 2nd. This is going to alleviate that from happening as much. It'll still happen, but it just won't happen as much. I think the teams will find a way to get around that, right? Two minor notes here for me. Full-time emergency backups are in the league now, which is fine. You just avoid a David Ayres situation, which is the probably the main thing that you do there. And no more dress code. This is like, I don't care. Like, I'm sorry. Like, cool for the players to be able to show up wearing, like, whatever they want. Now, I really don't care about what the players wear to the rink. But if this is something, this is clearly something the players wanted, so we'll go. That it's fine. It's fine. And the final thing I wanted to note, the 75 player retention thing that we saw some teams doing, where it would be a 3-team trade. You would send a good player to a team. They would, that the original team retains 50%. This other team retains 50% of that 50%, meaning the team that adds the player would only get the player at 75% retained. Examples of that, I think Patrick Kane a couple years ago. I can't remember who retained on him, but I know Chicago retained 50%. There was a third party that retained 50% of that, and then New York got him at like 25% of what his cap hit was. That is now nullified. There is a no trade period in place for players who are retained upon, where you can't just send them around to another team. They've nullified that. So going forward, teams are going to have to prepare to go back to 50% retention. 75% is not going to be an option. All in all, I take a look at what the league did with the CBA here, and I think that they did a decent job at the end of it. They cleaned up some loopholes that were a bit problematic in the league. They cleaned them up, and they gave the players some stuff that they wanted as well. I think it was an all-around good CBA. Clearly the negotiations went well with how early it was announced. I mean, we are still a year out from the end of it, and I believe it was the second last time a CBA was introduced was when the 2012 lockout happened. So they didn't even announce that until December it was. So all in all, I think that they did a pretty good job with the CBA. Let's go from talking about the CBA to the thing that happened a couple hours after the CBA was announced. Let's talk about the NHL draft. Now, I don't have a lot to say about the draft, but I do have some winners. I do have some losers who I want to point out. I think I just like a handful of teams, not a lot. We're not going to go over every single team's draft class because, let's be real, we would be here forever if we did, talking about players who I probably don't know all that much about. I'm not the biggest draft guru in the world. I'm not the most studied on this draft class. But there are some things to talk about from the draft. Mainly, the format. The format. Goddamn the format. We need to talk about this draft format. I think it has been universally agreed upon by most people that the decentralized draft was a mistake for this league. At least in the way that they did it. In the way that they did it, it was a mistake. You knew that this was not exactly going to go well from the moment you started getting reports that NHL teams, before the draft even began, kind of wish that we could go back to the old format. Now, personally speaking, for me, I love the old draft format. Maybe that's just nostalgia creeping in, but like having the entire scouting staff there and the front offices there, going up on stage, making the pick, it just felt nice. And also, compared to the other leagues' drafts, which are decentralized, where you have teams in their own little areas drafting their players, it kind of gave the NHL something different, which as a league in whole, and trust me, this podcast will dedicate several episodes to talking about the problems with the National Hockey League itself. But the NHL draft was the one thing that was kind of like a cool, unique standout. The problem with the NHL draft has always been it is too long compared to the other drafts. The everything regarding the draft was always too long. And I really, when I heard it was going to be decentralized, I really didn't think that it was going to speed anything up. And I was right. And I was, because I'm right about everything. No, that's not why. If I'm being honest, my evidence as to why it was going to be slow in the first place was look at what happened during the pandemic. Now, granted, that was a different time, yes. But the NHL drafts during the pandemic in 2020 and in 2021 were both decentralized. Teams were on their own. We have already had decentralized drafts. And those things were really slow. Those things were really bogged down. The 2021 draft, granted, it was not as long as this 2025 draft was, but it was still a 4-hour-long draft proceeding. And maybe that's the standard for the NHL draft over the past couple of years. I'd have to go look at the numbers, to be honest, but that's still too long, regardless of whether it's the standard or not. So really, you take a look at the decentralized format, I think more about day two. I can't remember what year it was, whether it was 2020 or 2021. But one of those 2 years, I believe it took an hour to get through the first 6 picks of the second round. Like, it wasn't going to work. And the way the NHL went on about it as well really extended it. There's a reason this thing was 4.5 hours, and it's not because the draft was decentralized. It's because the NHL sucks. like I'm being mean. I'm being mean. They do suck, but I'm being mean. Listen, we did not need the front office of the team to stand in front of a camera and awkwardly look at the player and say, "We're very happy to have you here," and the player saying, "Thanks, I'm really happy to be here." We didn't need that for almost every single pick. We didn't. I think I laughed when the Kings made their last pick, their pick in the first round. I think I actually laughed when Ken Holland was talking, just because it was the same thing that I had heard all the other times, but it was Ken Holland, and I laugh at Ken Holland any chance I get. In a making fun of way. But I digress. Um like, we didn't need it, and it bogged down the show. It added on extra minutes that it was just a waste of time. It was. The NHL and their technical errors this night also, like, it felt like on every single pick, either there was a problem communicating between Bettman and whoever was making the pick, if it was on a video screen, or there was technical problems with the draft interviews. There was technical problems everywhere you looked on this thing. Nobody had this down at all. Now, I am going to give the league credit for one thing, and you could say it was a little bit over the top and cheesy, but honestly, I thought it was fine. The trade alert button thing. I actually really like that idea. You think about marketing, right? You think about the presentation of the whole thing. I think it would be better if there wasn't a huge button hit, but like, imagine like the clips that you could get out of the draft if, let's say, a top 5 pick team is drafting, and everybody thinks, oh, they're about to make their pick, and then all of a sudden the building goes red. You get a trade alert. Again, is it hokey? Is it cheesy? Yes. You could make an argument it's better to just do the Bettman, we have a trade to announce, and then let the crowd build up. But honestly, low key, if next year they bring back the sound effect when don't have the button, just don't have the button, don't have the button. But if you were to bring back the whole trade alert thing, I wouldn't complain. That was fun, and let's face it, we need something fun. In the world, we need more fun things. That can be something fun. So, yeah, all in all, there were a couple things, like the trade alerts thing, that I did like about the format, but for the most part, we need to bury the decentralized format. Fly everybody out, turn the draft back into a spectacle. Let's have some fun. Please have some fun. I'm begging you. Well, maybe it's not fun, but just please. Back to the old format. Let's get things back on track. Speaking of let's get this podcast back on track. Let's talk about some actual hockey. I've been talking about the NHL, ragging on them. Let's actually talk about players. Let's talk about teams. Let's talk about the winners and losers from the draft. Let's talk about who I think did well in this draft and who I think lost in this draft. We're going to start with the winners. I have 5 teams that I thought did really well with this draft, that I kind of just wanted to give a showcase to. First things first, and maybe this is a bit predictable, the New York Islanders. They had a great draft night. I really liked what they did. We'll get into the Noah Dobson trade when I talk about the New York Islanders and what they did in free agency and with their offseason. But they had the 16th and 17th pick on top of the first pick. The rumors were they were trying to trade up into the top 5 to get James Higgins, and it would have been nice if they could do that. Unfortunately, they weren't able to, but they still did a really good job with what they had. They added Matthew Schaefer at number 1. Matthew Schaefer looks to be the best player from this draft class, and I've seen people talking about his potential. I honestly can't sit here and say what his potential is going to be. I mean, honestly, this does feel like one of those drafts where, and again, not saying everyone in this draft is bad. I'm just saying this feels like one of those drafts where the quality of the draft is not going to be from how good the top end is. It's going to be from the fact that there are a lot more players who are quality players overall. Um, like for me, I don't really know how much of a difference there is from anybody who went from like pick 13 through till the end of the first round. There was a lot of good players in this draft who could cap out to be about at the same level. Um, I think Matthew Schaefer might not have the highest ceiling in the draft, but I think that if you look at players where their floor is and where their ceiling is, I think Matthew Schaefer is like your best match, if that makes sense. I think there are a couple players that have more potential than Schaefer to be like more superstar than him, but I think that with those players, there's also a lower floor to them, meaning there's a better chance they would bust. So I think Matthew Schaefer is the best overall prospect you could have drafted for that reason. And the Islanders make the smart decision and draft him number one. Also, very tragic but also inspiring story from Matthew Schaefer. A lot of adversity he's had to overcome. And, I'm not the biggest Islanders fan in the world, mainly because of my own team's faults. The Matt Barzell trade will still continue to haunt me on a daily basis. But I will be cheering for Matthew Schaefer. I think most of the hockey world will be cheering for Matthew Schaefer to do well. Um, they also picked up with that 16th and 17th pick. Again, they weren't able to get Hagens, but they do draft Victor Eklund and Kenny Atchison with those picks, which is pretty good. That's a pretty good draft class, all things considered. I mean, like those are two pretty. Sorry, I said Kenny Atchison, and I the moment I said it, I thought I was wrong. Kashawn Atchison was the actual pick. Sorry, Kashawn. But yeah, they add at 16 and 17 two players who were supposed to be off the board earlier, who got good potential. They added the number one overall pick in the draft. They did pretty well. So I'm gonna name the New York Islanders a winner of the draft. Another team who I thought did really well in the draft is Boston Bruins. It is the Boston Bruins with James Hagens. How do you not look at James Hagens as being the best steal of the draft, in my opinion? You got a guy who was projected to go top 3 a couple months ago at the 7th overall spot. And James Hagens doesn't feel like one of those guys that fell because of him necessarily. He feels like one of those guys that fell just because other people rose above him on mock drafts. James Hagens has a lot of potential. And the fact that James Hagens, the guy who's projected to be a two-way monster of a center, goes to the Boston Bruins, who are looking for the Patrice Bergeron replacement. Not to mention he is, I think he's actually a New York kid. He's not a Boston kid. I'm not sure. I would actually have to double check that. But the fact that they were able to add James Hagens is honestly really good for them. Again, it's a steal. You got a steal of a pick here, which you're never going to complain about. Boston College, by the way, plays for Boston College, so he's sticking in the Boston area. Great pick for the Bruins. I think that they are one of the winners of the draft just because they got that luck. Third team I'm going to name as a winner of the draft is the Calgary Flames. I think the Calgary Flames did pretty dang good with what they had. They had a pick, I believe it was at 18. They had the 18th overall pick, and they had the 32nd overall pick. And they added Cole Reshny and Cullen Porter. For starters, the fan base seems to love both picks, and I think that does contribute into winners or losers, because if the fan base is happy, then everyone has a reason to be happy. So fans are happy with it. They got good value at both picks, especially Cullen Porter. You could have taken Cullen Porter where you took Cole Reshny, and I don't think anybody would have complained about the pick. But you add Cole Reshny on top of that, who looks to be a decent prospect. The Calgary Flames did pretty dang good with what they had, so I'm going to name them a winner as well. My fourth winning team is going to be the Anaheim Ducks. Now, I do have problems with how the Anaheim Ducks are handling the Roger McQueen pick. I do. My personal opinion on it is the Anaheim Ducks are doing to Roger McQueen what they kind of did to Trevor Zegras in a way, where they are taking somebody who has, superstar attributes to his character. He has his name. And his name. He has his name. They are using it to try and build like a superstar out of him, but he's a 10th overall pick who's still probably a couple years away from the league. Feels like you're building a lot of hype around somebody, which could end up leading to their downfall. You kind of saw it with Trevor Zegras. He showed some flash. He was built up to be the superstar. The league put him on a pedestal, and now he's just kind of quieted out, and now he's not even with Anaheim anymore. The Anaheim Ducks flew him to Disney the moment they drafted Roger McQueen to get a photo op with the Lightning McQueen thing at Disney, and then they his number was 95. Now that may very well have been his choice. I imagine it was, and it cool, but at the same time, we're treating this guy like he's like this already household name. So I'm a bit worried. All the semantics aside, though, Roger McQueen at 10 is, I don't know how they pulled that off. Roger McQueen easily could have been a top 5 pick. He could have went to Nashville, but instead he ends up going to the Anaheim Ducks, adding to that young forward core they have. I like the pick, and that's why they are one of my winners. And the final team I'm going to name as a winner, sticking in California, the San Jose Sharks. I really did like the San Jose Sharks draft. First things first, a lot like with the New York Islanders, they made a right choice. The right choice for the San Jose Sharks at number 2 was Michael Misa. A lot of talk of Anton Frondel going here. I will talk about Anton Frondel in a moment. But yeah, Michael Misa was the right pick. He was the right guy. He was the second best player in this draft. He is the guy that should have went number 2. A lot of people argue he could have went number 1. But he went number 2, and that was the right call. I think Michael Misa is going to be a really good forward for the Sharks. I think he's going to be that offensive number 1 they need. I take a look at that team, and Macklin Celebrini's great, but I feel like they are missing that truly elusive offensive piece because Eklund's more of a two-way guy, and Celebrini is going to be more of like a Jonathan Toews two-way guy. Not saying he's going to be bad offensively, but he's going to be more of a two-way forward. They need a guy whose goal is to go out there and score 100 points a year, and Michael Misa can be that. I think that's a good pick. And with Joshua Ravensburgen, I'm seeing a lot of people say that that wasn't a good pick for the Sharks to make because they already have, the Yaroslav Askarov in net. But we're kind of slowly moving towards being a league that is a, tandem heavy, I guess would be the way to put it. We're seeing a lot more teams going with a 1-2 punch. You're not having as many truly elite number 1s. And in that league, having a tandem of Ravensburgen and Askarov in the future could be good. Also, if Yaroslav Askarov, who's still young, doesn't pan out, you do have a backup plan in Joshua Ravensburgen. It's all about value. And taking Ravensburgen in the first round, maybe it doesn't fill the biggest need for them, but it gives them a lot of value. So I think that the San Jose Sharks made a good pick here with Ravensburgen. That and Misa, they're a winner in this draft. Let's talk about the losers for a sec, because the losers of this draft there were a few. First things first, we have the Columbus Blue Jackets. I am torn on the Blue Jackets because, firstly, they did take Draxton Smith, which looked to be a really good pick, and I didn't mind it. But then their next pick came up, and they drafted Pyotr Andreev, out of Russia. Now, this pick startlingly reminds me of the Yegor Chinnikov pick from 2020, which ended up being okay. But listen, I can't sit here and say that the team that made objectively the worst pick of the first round, where they took somebody far above where they should have, I cannot sit here and say that that team did well, especially when their other pick, Jackson Smith, went basically around where he was supposed to go. So, in terms of value alone, I've got to give the Blue Jackets a loss here. Also, if they were going to go a goalie at this pick, which isn't a bad choice, your tandem's not the best right now. Ivan Kovic, Ravensburgen. There's other people that are better than Andreev, and you took a swing on a guy. This is a risk. It's a risky pick, and I can't justify putting a team that made that much of a risky pick in anywhere but the loser category. So sorry to Columbus, but I think you guys didn't do the best of the draft. This is also this might be an unpopular opinion. I also have the Chicago Blackhawks as the loser of this draft. Um, for starters, we'll get to Frondell. I want to just get the other two out of the way. You used your 25 pick on a guy who was projected to go mid second round, who's not really a known prospect, Vaclav Nestrazil. Sorry, just not all that great of a pick. I think that you could have gotten better value there. And Mason West, if he comes over, sure, but like the guy is debating whether or not to go and be a D1 football player right now. I think he's might end up taking that. Is he like that? That might be the pick where in a year's time you're looking back saying that was the biggest mistake we could have made. You used a first on a guy who's not even committed to being a hockey player. That's a big risk. And going back to Anton Frondell, he was mocked to go in the top three. It was him, Schaefer, Misa, and him were projected to go in some form in the top three. I don't get the hype behind Anton Frondell. Now, listen. He might end up being a good player. I think there's a good chance he ends up making the NHL and ends up being solid. But I don't think that his ceiling is as high as some of the guys who went around him. You cannot tell me that the ceiling on Anton Frondell is higher than the ceiling on James Higgins. At this point in time, I'm not going to believe you if you told me that. I don't think that this was the smartest pick the Blackhawks could have made. I think that there were other players here that they could have went for that would have been better for them. I think they need to swing for the potential fence, and I think that they whiffed. And I think they picked somebody that was a bit more of a safe pick that's not going to be as good for them in the future. And my final loser of the draft is Radim Mertka. And note how I said not the Buffalo Sabres are the losers here, because the Buffalo Sabres drafted the second best defenseman in this class. Even if they didn't need defense as much, especially a lefty, it's fine. But you can tell from the interview he did after the draft, that face will be stick with me forever. It'll be the thing I remember about Radim Mertka the most until he wins the Stanley Cup with a team that's not the Buffalo Sabres. He clearly didn't want to be a Sabre. That's all I'm gonna say. But that really just wraps up my draft coverage. I mean, other than that, you can't really say a lot more about this draft. Not a lot of guys who are going to jump in and play game one of their first year here with their organizations. A lot of guys who are going to need more time developing. It's a really hard draft to gauge at this point. All eyes are going to be turned towards next year's draft, where you're going to have Gavin McKenna going number one, and there's going to be a lot of teams in the Gavin McKenna sweepstakes. And I honestly think, looking at how free agency played out this year, yeah, there's going to be a lot of teams in the Gavin McKenna race. Because when you take a look at how free agency went this year overall, very interesting outcome. Now, my plan for this is, instead of just talking about free agency, we're going to wrap everything together. I have this formatted that I have a page for all 32 teams of some of the bigger moves that they made, the more notable ones. So trades that involved NHL pieces and players they signed that make a little over $1 million. I didn't want to throw in all the guys I'm like, even for Edmonton, I don't want to sit here and talk about how Curtis Lazar is going to impact the Edmonton Oilers. No offense to Curtis Lazar. He's going to be a fourth liner. That's it. So I kind of kept it to the more higher profile guys, some of the bigger names, bigger contracts. But yeah, let's talk about free agency here, because there are a lot of different... But before we get into the actual teams, let's start by talking about what actually was happening with free agency, because I noticed a few different trends that were very interesting. Well, some everybody acknowledged, some I just acknowledged. So for starters, the biggest names re-signed, and the actual free agency day itself was boring as all hell. Just to be blatant about it. Marner was gone before free agency day. Provorov was gone before free agency day. Dobson was dealt with. All the guys who could have actually been factors on free agency day, who could have been big, and I'm leaving out a lot of names there. All the Florida guys were done before free agency happened. A lot of the names, June 30th was the real free agency day, and nobody really left their own team except for Marner. So, it was a bit of a boring day, but a lot of players decided to re-sign with their teams, which I think does tell a bit of a story that A lot of teams in this free agency class weren't trying to go out there and add anybody new. They were just trying to keep what they had and see if they could run it back again. Running it back seems to be a big part of this year. There are a few teams that went out there and took some swings. Vegas, Montreal, Utah. Aside from that, a lot of teams just said we're going to stick the course with what we had, maybe tinker a little bit on the outside, but for the most part, we are going to stay where we are. Um, a big trend I saw with a lot of the signings here, bonuses. Bonus laden contracts were very much running around. A lot of veterans in this league. I think there's almost 10 contracts here where it is a player signs a 1 year deal at a low amount, but there are a ton of signing bonuses that can bump it. We've seen them before, obviously, but they were a lot more rare. Maybe you'd see one or two in offseason. This year, there are a lot of different guys who sign these bonus-like contracts. Jamie Benn signed one. Brent Burns just signed one. Claude Giroux signed one. Jonathan Toews signed one. Ton more to go over that signed a contract that had a ton of bonuses in it rather than the bigger cap hit. Which I honestly think is a good thing. Because for these veteran guys, who knows what they're going to do? And so it kind of gives both teams a good in on how to handle it. Because if these players end up overperforming or performing to a standard that is set, yeah, you have no problem paying them. But if they end up underperforming, not as good. Meanwhile, for these players, they have a choice. Either you take a 1 year flat deal at what's going to be a good rate, but not the best rate in the world, or you take a bonus laden deal where you take a lower cap hit off the bat, but if you can hit your goals, you're going to get more money than you would have gotten by just taking the flat deal. So I think that bonuses being in these contracts, I think it's going to make the league a lot more fun going forward. Also, it keeps the actual AAV of contracts down, which, if I'm not mistaken, makes them easier to flip come times like the deadline. I don't believe the bonuses apply to the AAV, but I'm honestly not sure of that. I'm not a capologist, so I'm not sure. Also, I mentioned it off the bat. The old man renaissance is here. If you are over 35 in this league, you are now a hot commodity because, good Lord Almighty, the idea of bringing in veterans, regardless of, in some cases, regardless of, what the actual numbers were, but bringing in the veteran presence, it felt really magnified this year. And I get it. You had guys like Brad Marchand and Corey Perry playing like it was basically 2010 again in the finals. You want to try and have anybody you can to recapture that. But I think that this might end up leading to a lot of contracts that are going to end badly, especially with the cap spiking up as much as it's going to over the next couple of years. So let's just wait and see on it all. Also, shorter term deals. A lot of shorter term deals. A lot of the best players took shorter term deals when they could have gotten longer term deals. Part of this, I think, again, part of it's a team thing, part of it's a player thing. A lot of players are going to hold out for a couple more years until the cap spikes even more, get a larger payday then. Teams don't really feel confident in paying a lot of guys who maybe are on the older age of things, Mikael Granlund, longer term deals, so let's give them the shorter term contracts at the higher AAV and roll through with it, right? And a final thing that played a big role in free agency this year, and maybe more so in the lead up to free agency than free agency itself, income state tax. And you knew, as a Canadian, I was going to bring this up at some point, but listen, there's been a lot of debate over the income state tax. A lot of debate over, does it give the teams that have a lower income state tax an unfair advantage? Or is it just a matter of GMs down there are good and GMs everywhere else aren't? I think the answer falls somewhere in between. Do I think players are incentivized to sign for less money in those income state tax lesser markets? Because they're going to still be walking out with more take-home pay. Yes, of course. Of course it does. I think that if you're a player and you're going to Florida, of course you're going to be okay with taking a little bit less money because you're still going to be making more money than you would be making, say, if you went to New York or if you went to Canada, right? It's just the way it's just the way it goes. Do I think a part of the reason why these income state tax teams are so good, do I think a part of it is because the GMs down there are good? Yes. I think Tampa's management's good. I think Bill Zito is the best GM in the league. I think that Dallas has a good GM. I mean, their GM is a 3-time in a row GM of the Year winner, isn't he? And I think Vegas has the we're going to go all out management strategy that works. I don't know if their management group is the best on paper. I think there's other attributes than picking up star players that makes you a good general manager and makes your staff good. But I do think that it is a notion. So I think it's somewhere in between. Now, after what Florida was able to pull off, I do think that there's a much higher chance that, say, in the next round of CBA talks, there is a conversation about, is there something we can do regarding the, income state tax? Is there a way that we can give a bit more of an advantage and fair, make things a bit more fair for the other teams in the league? I do think that there is some provision that could be made. And I see a lot of people pointing to Gary Bettman saying, well, he said it was no issue, so they're not going to do anything. Gary Bettman for a long time said LTIR was not going to be looked at, and he said that it was not a factor in things. And clearly, the NHLPA and everyone who crafted the CBA thought differently because they've now implemented the playoff salary cap. I would not be surprised if, teams with the lower income state tax continue to do really well. I wouldn't be surprised if you see a provision in the CBA next time around that has something to do with it. Maybe some sort of an equalizer that, has players walking out with as much take-home pay. Maybe like I don't even know how it would work. This is just pure speculation on my part, but maybe some sort of here's the AAV. Let's say you go to New York, and here's the AAV, but because Florida has that income state tax, maybe while the AAV is lower, the actual money you're being paid is a bit higher. Honestly, I'm not sure how you even navigate that, but I do think that you will see there be more of a conversation about it as the years go on, especially if Florida continues to do well. I think that, Florida, Tampa, Vegas, Dallas, if those 4 teams continue to do well, if those 4 teams continue to run the shop in the league, like they have been basically, Tampa to a lesser extent, but still, I think you're going to see it be more of a conversation. Finally, let's talk about the top remaining names in free agency, because there's actually still a lot of talent out there that is available. Nikolai Ehlers, who just put up 63 points in 69 games, he's reviewed as he was the top guy going in to the whole damn thing. He is still a prominent name. Matt Grzelcyk is out there as well. One of 2 good defensemen, I would say, is left. He had 40 points in 82 games. I could see a team picking him up to be a third pair offensive defenseman. Dmitry Orlov is the other big-time defenseman out there. He just had 28 points in 76 games. I think he can still be a useful guy for a team. Jack Roslovic, Victor Olofsson, Jeff Skinner, and Anthony Beauvillier. Just a few depth forwards that are out there, but are more than depth forwards. Guys who could play in your middle 6. Guys who could put up some points for you. I could see Jeff Skinner going to a more of a rebuilding team that's, maybe even like a San Jose, where he can go collect a ton of points, take a trade to a contender, heading into the playoffs. Meanwhile, I think a guy like Jack Roslovic could go to a win-now team right now and try to elevate them. Maybe, a team like Toronto. I would imagine a team like Toronto could be in on one of these guys. I'd hope a team like Edmonton could maybe be in on one of those guys. I would take Victor Olofsson beside Connor McDavid, please and thank you. And also, if there's any teams out there that need goalies, the goalie market is kind of terrible, but Ilya Samsonov is there, and maybe he could bounce back a little bit. And Alexander Georgiev is he is there. So with all that being said, let's start going into all these teams. But first, I'm actually going to cut the recording and start back up in a little bit because I have some stuff to handle, and I also need some water. So you guys aren't going to see any intermission, but I am going to see myself to an intermission. And I guess that it's a good thing that I chose to take an intermission because Dmitry Orlov just signed with San Jose, and I had to throw that in here at the last minute. So I'm not taking any more breaks, and I'm not checking social media anymore. So if anything happens after this, it's going to have to wait. So Nikolai Ehlers, please do not sign until tomorrow, please, so I can get this up and not have it be fully out of date. Anyways, let us hop into it. Let's start talking about all 32 NHL teams. Like I mentioned, we are going to be going over their biggest trades, their biggest signings and extensions, and just an overall look at what their team is and what I think they are leading towards. So, let's start with the Anaheim Ducks. They had a fairly busy offseason in the trade market. They made three notable trades that should be pointed out. They acquired Chris Kreider from the New York Rangers. They traded Trevor Zegras to the Philadelphia Flyers. And they traded John Gibson to the Detroit Red Wings. Let's start with the Chris Kreider deal. This was a bit of an interesting deal. The trade was um, former second round pick Casey Terrence was packaged with the 89th overall pick in the draft and was moved to the New York Rangers for Chris Kreider and the 104th pick. Now, before I go any further, I do just want to note this. You're not going to hear me call out winners and losers of trades on most occasions here, mainly because I think a lot of the moves that happened this summer, it's really hard for me to name a winner because I think it's more than just looking at what the teams got from a third party perspective, it's also looking at what the two teams got from their own perspective. For example, I take a look at this trade and I say to myself, well, Chris Kreider is a good player who had a really bad season. If he can bounce back, this is a good deal for the Ducks. But if he doesn't bounce back, then the Rangers just got off all this money. So it's kind of hard to say who wins and loses this deal. If I were to lean somewhere, I would probably say that the Anaheim Ducks won this deal just because the Ducks had more money to play with and they can probably afford to take the risk of Chris Kreider and what he could be at his best. But the thing is, that explanation I laid out, that is exactly why both teams wanted to do this trade and why both teams would view this trade as an absolute win from them. If you're the Anaheim Ducks, and we'll talk about the Rangers' perspective later. I want to just focus on one team's perspective at a time. Why would the Anaheim Ducks make the Chris Kreider trade? Well, they need NHL players, and they need people that can perform. Chris Kreider, just a couple years ago, had a 50-goal year, was it? Chris Kreider is known for scoring goals. Even last year, he had 22 goals on a abysmal, everything is going wrong, the sky is falling New York Rangers team. If he can come into Anaheim and bounce back, maybe get back up to that 30 goal, 25 to 30 assist range, hopefully he'll have better players. Well, maybe not better players. He'll have a better scene around him anyways. If he can bounce back up to what he was, that's no problem at all. I wrote this down here, and I think this is the best way to put it. Medium risk, high reward. They didn't give up nothing for him. They did give up Casey Terrence, who is a former second-round pick from just a couple years ago, so he still could be good for all you know. But even with the medium risk, if it pays off, this deal could pay off. Either it pays off in Chris Kreider bouncing back to form and the Ducks having a bona fide top six forward, or it pays off in the form of maybe he bounces back and you trade him away for a good haul at the deadline, or next year's deadline, or next offseason. A lot of options with Chris Kreider. I think it's a good trade for the Ducks overall. I think they got what they wanted out of the trade. I think that's fine. Trevor Zegras was moved to the Philadelphia Flyers. The Anaheim Ducks got back for Trevor Zegras, Ryan Poehling, the 45th pick in the draft, and a 4th-round pick in 2026. Trevor Zegras is coming off of back-to-back down seasons where he also spent time injured. And it felt like this was going to be the thing. Zegras' name has been floated out there for a while now. It's not really surprising he got traded. And I kind of mentioned this when talking about Roger McQueen earlier. I kind of have to blame the Ducks for the reason why Trevor Zegras is disappointed. Trevor Zegras, for all we know, may go to Philly and pop off. But at the same time, Trevor Zegras, he showed glimpses of being a good top six forward. But he never got to the point where he was showing, aside from the Michigan stuff, how he never got to the point where he was showing that he could be the top line, first line, elite guy of the future. It was more so the hype machine behind him doing a lot of the work for him. So, yeah, I think that Trevor Zegras is a solid NHL player, but I also don't think he's a top line guy. Now, did they sell low on him? Yes, absolutely, they did. because of the injuries, because of the underperformance. But I think it was just one of those things where it was time to move on from Zegras for both team and player. And when you look at what the Ducks got back, while they did sell low, they do have some interesting pieces here. A second round pick's a second round pick. A fourth round pick is a fourth round pick. And Ryan Poehling put up 31 points in 68 games. 12 of those are goals. Not the best numbers in the world, but if he can be a good third line guy that can play a bit of defense, maybe even throw some hits for him. I'm not sure on his hit numbers, by the way, so don't quote me on that. He'd be good. He's going to be good for them. Also, a big factor in this is probably Joel Quenneville. When you're a coach, despite the moral stuff, when you're a coach that is as good and has the reputation he has, you do get a say in roster construction. I don't think Trevor Zegras is a fit with Joel Quenneville hockey. I think Ryan Poehling is, and I think that could help Ryan Poehling. Ryan Poehling was once viewed as a guy who could be a top six forward. Could with his performance from last year, is there a chance that maybe Ryan Poehling has a little bit more to offer in a Joel Quenneville run team? Maybe. We'll see. He's in a contract here too, so he has every incentive to play well. Let's see how Ryan Poehling ends up playing in Anaheim. And finally, it finally happened. It feels like this is the summer for the Ducks where things are finally happening. I believe he's been rumored in trades since 2016, probably. John Gibson is no longer an Anaheim Duck. He's been traded to the Detroit Red Wings for Peter Mrazek, a second and a fourth. So basically, slightly less than what they got back for Zegras. And listen, John Gibson had his first good season in a very long time this past year. In 29 games, he was 9-12. It's the only reason they were able to move on from him. Like, I get it. I get the idea of maybe wanting to keep Gibson at this point and run a tandem with him and Dostal. I think you just move on from Gibson, and I think that they picked the right time too. They had to wait a while, but they got the best return they could have. They got something back for a guy who's been there for a long time. I think it's fine. They don't have to worry about Gibson crashing out again. They get something back for him. Good return. A second and a fourth's not a bad return. You do have to swallow Mrazek's contract another year at 4.25, but I think you can handle that. You have the money to do so. Not bad. I think it's a bit of a nothing move for them anyways, but it does make things interesting for a guy like Ville Husso. Transitioning to that, looking at the guys who they've extended or signed, they extended Ville Husso. Guess brought him back would be more so the word. 2 years at $2 million per season. He was an $890 in 13 games last year. Not good, but maybe in a backup role he can be better. The big move the Anaheim Ducks made was signing Mikael Granlund. 3-year contract, $7 million per season. That's $21 million altogether. 66 points in 83 games last year. Bit of a disappointing playoffs for the Ducks, but could still be a good top six forward for the Anaheim Ducks. So wrapping all that up, you take a look at all the moves they made. Losing Zegras, losing Gibson, adding Kreider, adding Husso, adding Granlund. Taking a look overall, I'd have to say, Anaheim could do something this year. I think that their team now is better than it was before the summer started, which is always the goal. It's always the goal to make the improvement. I think that you could see a team that took a bit of a step forward last year, take another one this year. I don't know if they're going to step into, playoff status. I don't think we're there yet. Could they be an 80-point team, an 85-point team maybe? Could they be a team that is knocking on the door of the wild card up until, the All-Star break? I think so. I think it's reasonable that could be a thing. My big problem with the Ducks, they have a lot of good players. Leo Carlson, Mason McTavish is there, Cutter Gauthier is there, Troy Terry's still there. You've got veterans like Kreider and Killorn and Granlund there now. Your D-core has some guys on it as well. I really can't name a lot of them off the top of my head. Minchukov. There you go. There's one, right? And Lucas Dostal as their goaltender. They've got a good team building here. They don't have a number one forward, and they don't have a number one defenseman. You need to have those two elite pillars to be truly a contender. They don't have either pillar right now. Until they get those, I don't really think that we can talk about the Ducks being in that conversation, and maybe one of their guys develops into being that. Maybe they find a guy in free agency one day. But right now it feels like the Anaheim Ducks are kind of just spinning the wheels right now, and you might hear me say that a lot today because I personally feel that with this free agency, a lot of teams are just spinning the wheels right now. Boston, speaking of spinning wheels, so they made one trade that was notable. That was Victor Arvidsson. They acquired him for a 2027 fifth, and listen, as an Oilers fan, Arvidsson was not good this past year, but he is a former top six forward. He has the ability to put up points. I think for a fifth round pick, even with him making $4 million, it's a fine investment. And Boston really didn't have a lot of options in free agency, anyways. They went with what they wanted to go for. I think that they can make do with it. In terms of signing, they re-signed 3 guys and they brought in 3 new ones. Mason Lohrei signs a 2-year, $3.2 million per season deal. 33 points in 77 games for the defenseman is fine. Morgan Geekie, coming off of a 33-goal year, signs a 6-year contract with the Bruins at $5.5 million per year. That's a good contract, I think, as well. I don't really think you can complain about that, especially with the cap going up. That's fine. And Henry Jokiharju, 3x3. Maybe a bit of an overpayment, but looking at some of the right-hand defensemen out there, they were able to re-sign him for that. I think that's fine. On top of that, the Boston Bruins bring in 3 new forwards. Well, bring 1 back, but 3 forwards into the organization. Sean Kuraly returns to Boston. 2 years, 1.85 per. If he can just be like a 4th liner for them, I think you're happy with that. Michael Anesamont, 2 years, 1.45 AAV. Again, if he can just be a good 4th liner for them, I think they'd be okay with that. The big contract is Tanner Jeannot, 5 years at $3.4 million per year. I don't think Tanner Jeannot is worth $3.4 million per year, considering the fact that both Kuraly and Anesamont finished with more points than them. I know that he had injuries, and I know that he's more of a physical guy as well. I just don't think Tanner Jeannot's worth that, especially on a 5-year term. That could turn out to be a pretty rough contract for the Boston Bruins, depending on how Jeannot ends up playing. Listen, the Boston Bruins, I feel like this is going to be another retool/rebuild year for them. They didn't do anything that significant. If Tanner Jeannot is your biggest pickup on a team where your top 2 centers are Elias Lindholm and Pavel Zacha at the moment, I don't think that you're seriously in the spot to be able to take a run. Now, a lot of things went wrong for Boston last year. If Swayman can be better, you'll have Lindholm back. Maybe they can get back into the playoffs. Maybe they can do something here. But honestly, I just don't think that they've made any upgrades here that help them get any farther towards that goal necessarily. More so than just what they're doing right now. So yeah, I just don't know what to think about the Boston Bruins necessarily. I feel like they're spinning wheels. I feel like they're spinning wheels too. I feel like a lot of teams looked at the fact Florida brought back everybody and decided, you know what? Maybe this isn't our year, and have just not tried as hard. Okay. So I think you're going to see a lot of that here. Buffalo. I need to take some water before I talk about Buffalo, because what do you say about the Buffalo Sabres? Listen, I'm just going to let you know off the bat, I'm not a fan of their offseason. I'm not. I think that while they did some things that are interesting, I don't think that they did the best. I don't think they did the best. Firstly, they traded away JJ Peterka. Now, Peterka was not going to sign with the Buffalo Sabres. He just wasn't going to. Even as an RFA, he had enough sway there. I just don't think he was going to sign with the Buffalo Sabres. He's traded to the Utah Mammoth for Josh Doan and Michael Kessler. Listen. I understand that they were looking for roster players to come back and replace JJ Peterka. I get that. You had multiple first-round picks on the table for JJ Peterka, and you went with this deal instead. That's a problem. That is a problem. Again, I understand it, but why not take those 2 first and then ship them off for good players? You could do that as well. You could have taken those 2 first-round picks and flipped them for Noah Dobson if you wanted to. You could have gotten Noah Dobson. That would have been a right-hand defenseman. Listen, Michael Kessler, is a very good, underpaid right-hand defenseman who can put up some points and play. You've got a right-hand defenseman on that team. You needed one. Josh Doan is a forward who has some potential, can do some stuff. Yes, he can. I still don't think they got enough. I still don't think the deal justifies moving on from Peterka. And again, I'm trying to look at all these deals as, okay, what are each side getting out of it? What is Buffalo getting out of the JJ Peterka deal? Aside from a right-hand defenseman that they do need a right-hand defenseman, but aside from that, they're not really getting enough out of this deal for me to say, you know what? This was a good deal for the Sabres. There is potential for this to be salvageable. If Josh Doan pops off, if Michael Kessler maybe even takes another step, or at least remains what he's at, or more importantly, they're able to re-sign Michael Kessler, then this deal's fine. It could be okay. But if Josh Doan cannot step up a bit more, if Kesslering walks after a year, this is going to be a bad deal for the Buffalo Sabres. It will be. So just embrace that as a possibility. The Buffalo Sabres then trade away Connor Clifton and the 39th pick for Connor Timmins and a prospect named Isaac Bullion. They cleared up Clifton's $3.3 million, giving up an early second-round pick to do so. That is a lot to give up to clear up $3.3 million, especially when, taking a look at some of the defensive contracts on the market, Connor Clifton for 1 year at 3.3 is better than a lot of right-hand defenseman contracts that are out there right now. And like you paid an early second to do it too. Like Buffalo, I get you're trying to clear money, but you cleared money to do nothing with it. You cleared money to do nothing with it. That's my other problem with it. And then you traded Sam Lafferty as well. The Buffalo Sabres trade Sam Lafferty to Chicago for a 6th round pick. They clear $2 million in cap. That deal's fine. That deal's that's like the best trade they made all summer so far, because you pick up a pick for a guy who's kind of on your fourth line, who's making too much money. Boom. Easy deal. You're happy with it. Man, those first two trades are not good for Buffalo. And in terms of contracts they handed out, they re-signed Jack Quinn, 2 years, $3.375 AAV. He's a good young player. I think that's an okay contract. Ryan McLeod, who had a good season, 53 points in 79 games, signs for 4 years at $5 million per. That's a good contract. They added Justin Danforth, 2 years, $1.8 per year, and they added Alex Leon, 2 years, $1.5 per year. Alex Leon's a goalie. Justin Danforth is a fourth-line type guy. Not bad. Listen, let's get down to the crux of it. First things first. The Bowen Byram situation is still there as well. That's the other part of this team that we're kind of waiting for. Like, they have the unfortunate possibility of having a trifecta of bad moves here. But like, the Bowen Byram situation is interesting because there's talks he could get an offer sheet for 1 year. A 1 year contract offer sheet, which would be absolutely awful for the Buffalo Sabres. Because if Bowen Byram is offer sheeted for, let's say, $7 million for 1 year, the Sabres have a choice. Either you let that team take him away and get only a first and third round pick back, or you match it and then you can't trade Bowen Byram for the full year unless you, like, re-sign him and then trade him next year, which I don't think would happen. So you're and he's a UFA the year after, mind you. So you're kind of stuck with Bowen Byram unless you trade him before there is an offer sheet out on him. If I'm Buffalo, I'm just taking the most valuable offer you can because you need to get some value back. The ownership of this team is the biggest problem. It's their biggest handcuff. I don't think that... How should I put this about Kevin Adams? I think he is a little bit in over his head right now. I think he is. I think that this has devolved into a situation that is a bit too advanced of a problem for him to deal with. This is his first time as an NHL GM. He has made some solid moves, but there's also a lot of bad ones in there that have kind of blown up in his face. But he's kind of in a position where he is liked by Pegula, so he will continue to be brought out there until the wheels literally fall off. It really did seem for a bit there that the Sabres were turning a new leaf, that they were finding a new fitting. But yeah, all that hope is basically gone after another bad season, and after all this. I cannot get over that JJ Paterka deal because there was a time where I kind of warmed up to the deal and was like, okay, maybe this isn't too bad. But looking at it now, looking at the numbers, hearing that there was better offers out there, it's hard to look at the JJ Paterka deal and see it as anything but a loss for the Sabres. And like giving up a second to get off that money when you don't need to clear the money in the first place also is rough. That's just a bad deal for the Buffalo Sabres. And overall, yeah, overall, I just don't really know what they're doing. This team didn't get better. They're just hoping things work out better next year, but they did not get better. The Calgary Flames are up next, and not much to talk about with them. Kevin Ball resigns 6 years, 5.35. Joel Hanley resigns 2 years, 1.75. Morgan Frost resigns 2 year, 4.375. And that's it. In terms of notable moves they made, that's it. There could be a Rasmus Anderson trade here. Reportedly, they are not able to come to terms on a contract. Apparently, Anderson seems very keen on going to Vegas, but they're having a hard time working that out, especially with the whole Mitch Marner thing. They weren't able to get a deal done before the Knights signed Marner, so now it's a question of, well, how do you make that happen? So there could be a Rasmus Anderson trade at some point coming up here. But overall, this team is another one of these teams that didn't really improve on paper, didn't make any big additions, any additions at all, really. But they are banking on the development. You're banking on a guy like Frost or like Zari or Coronado to get a little bit better, take another step forward, and help bring this team to the playoffs. Dustin Wolf was a dang near Calder winning goalie this year. Build off of that. Build off of Dustin Wolf being a dang near Calder winner and go from there. The Carolina Hurricanes are up next, and boy, oh boy, they made a big move this year. This is probably the first team we've gotten to that has made a big splash that sits here and helps me say, you know what? This team got better. They added Keandre Miller for Scott Morrow, either theirs or Dallas's first round pick this upcoming year, and a 2026 second round pick. Miller comes to Carolina with an 8-year, $60 million extension, 7.5 per year. Listen, I really like the pickup for the Hurricanes. They did give up a fair amount to get Miller, but I think Miller does have more upside than what he's shown in New York. He comes to town with an 8-year contract, so you know he's not going anywhere, which is always good. And yeah, he's a good player, and he's got good player, cost controlled, good upside. Good addition for the Hurricanes. They don't add a veteran, they add a younger guy. It's a younger that's the thing that I'm really liking about this deal. They're not giving up the first, the second, and the prospect for a guy who's 29 or 30. They're giving it up for somebody who is still developing in a way, who's only 25 years old, I think. Good deal for the Hurricanes. They extended Eric Robinson 4 years, 1.7 per. They brought in Mike Riley for 1 year at 1.1 million, and they extended Logan Stankoven 8 years, $6 million per year. That's a really good deal for Logan Stankoven. And sure, 38 points in 78 games. Maybe there's still a bit to be desired there, but I mean, he's 22 years old. Isn't going to take a lot for him to develop into a guy being worth far more than $6 million. So to get him at that cap hit is fine. Adding Keandre Miller makes this team better. Can they get over the hump, which is the conference finals, which is the Florida Panthers? Can they get over that? That's going to be the big question when talking about the Carolina Hurricanes. So, all in all, I like what they did. We'll have to see if they can build on it going forward. The Chicago Blackhawks, they didn't do a whole lot either. A lot of teams here did not make a whole lot of moves now, did they? They made the Burakovsky-Veleno swap. Listen, Andre Burakovsky can be a good player. I actually like the Burakovsky pickup. Chicago had the cap to be able to pick him up and take him on. You take on a guy who had 37 points in 79 games in a bit of a down season. Put him beside Connor Bedard and see what can happen. He can be a good offensive weapon for Bedard to have, which is the big priority. They also picked up Sam Lafferty. I don't like the fact that they picked that. Well, actually, no. That's a fine trade. Lafferty is good defensively and offensively. You paid a 6th-round pick, and again, with a team like Chicago who has so much money available to spend, the cap hit doesn't matter. Ryan Donato signs a 4x4 with them as well. He actually had a really good year with them. 31 goals, 31 assists. That's not a bad season, even on a bad team. He'll be in a spot where he can replicate that again. He'll be playing with the same group. The team is relatively unchanged. TJ Brody has been bought out of the final year of his contract as well, so he will not be back. All in all, for the Blackhawks, not a lot to talk about. Not the worst offseason they could have had. Again, I did put them down as a loser in the draft because I didn't like a lot of their picks, but in terms of what they actually did with free agency and the trade market, they did okay. I can't really see them taking a step forward this year, but I can see maybe Bedard having a bounce back year and maybe that catalysting them, maybe not to be a bottom 5 team. We'll have to see how it really plays out, but I think that if you're looking at a team that's maybe going to be in the Gavin McKenna sweepstakes next year again, it's going to be Chicago, and it's going to be incredibly, incredibly annoying if McKenna does go there. Moving on to Colorado, my voice, it is not good that we are only 17, that we're on our 7th team, and my voice already sounds like this. That is not a good thing. Yeah, when it comes to the Colorado Avalanche, it really feels like they thought they were going to be able to make a bigger move. That's what when I look at what they did, it feels like this is a team that thought they were going to be able to do something more than what they did. They made a great trade with the Columbus Blue Jackets. They traded away Charlie Coyle and Miles Wood for Gavin Brindley, pick 77, and a second-round pick next year. That's really good. They cleared up $7.75 million this year, and then they trade. And with Miles Wood's contract, that's $2.5 for this year and 3 more after. They cleared that money for guys who just didn't really play well with the Avalanche this past year, and they got good assets for the circumstance. Were they really in a position where they should be selling guys off? Maybe not, but they do anyways. And they get some good reward for it as well. They get some young pieces that can help them in the future. Because you're going to need, young cost-controlled guys. Gavin Brindley can be that. You can draft guys who can be that. So I like that deal for the Avs a lot. And I understand why they made it, to clear up the money. Like I said, I think they had a bit of a more ambitious plan this offseason, but they didn't end up being able to chase it. They re-signed Brock Nelson, 3 years, 7.5. They re-signed Sam Malinsky, 1 year, 1.4. And they give Brent Burns, and I think this is the first example we have here, a 1 year, $1 million deal worth as much as $4 million with signing bonuses. They also extended Parker Kelly starting next year for 4 years at $1.7 million. Again, no big additions for the Avs. If anything, they actually lost pieces on the forward core this year. But this is a favorite to make a big deal at the deadline, in my opinion. And I think they are keeping that money open. And I think that there is a certain Nova Scotia kid we're going to be talking about later in this video that may be going to Colorado at some point, considering the open void that is on this team that could be filled by said Nova Scotia kid. So yeah, I don't mind what Colorado did. I think they played it safe this offseason, and I think that that's okay. As for the Columbus Blue Jackets, they were the other team a part of that Charlie Coyle Miles Wood trade, and they were on the receiving end of it. And I get what they're doing. They're picking up solid players that have an NHL reputation, but for the contracts that Wood's on, and for the amount of money Coyle makes this year, to give up that much asset for the two of them, to give up a early second a couple years ago, and a third, that's a lot to give up for Charlie Coyle and Miles Wood. Even if they can bounce back from how they played in Colorado, that's a lot to give up for them. They did extend Dante Fabro for 4 years at $4.125, considering what some of the other right-hand defensemen got on the market. No problems there. Ivan Provorov signs a 7-year, $8.5 million deal, which is a choice. That is a thing you can choose to do. That is a lot of money for Ivan Provorov, considering he is not the best all-around defenseman in the world. But at the same time, if you're Columbus, taking a look at all the good players you've lost out on over the past half decade or so, maybe a little longer, good players not wanting to be in Columbus becoming a bit of a meme almost at times. Man, keeping Ivan Provorov around, keeping a guy who would have went and made more money on the open market probably, yeah, I understand it. I can at least understand it. They also got Isaac Lundstrom, 2 years, $1.3 million AAV. And I'm going to be honest, I have like an overall thoughts section on my pages. I wrote down the word meh for the Columbus Blue Jackets because it's another team. They at least added. They added players, but I don't know if they added the type of players that are going to help them get into the playoffs. Another team that needed help in goaltending that was not able to address it all that well. They joined. I mean, there's a lot of teams here that needed to do something with goaltending and maybe didn't. I think they're actually like the first example of it for sure. We'll get to more. Trust me. Trust me. We'll get to more. We'll get to more. If you're watching the video of this, you see me pointing at an Oilers flag. We'll get to more. But overall, yeah, I don't mind what they did. But it's meh. It's meh. What they did was meh. That's what I think of it. I don't think they put themselves into an overly good spot, but I don't think that they made themselves worse. They didn't shoot themselves in the foot, which is fine. So yeah, now I promised I wasn't going to take another break. But my voice is currently falling apart on me. So I'm going to take a few minutes to drink some more water. And yeah, we'll come back and talk about the Dallas Stars. So that break took a little bit longer than I expected it to. It took so long, as a matter of fact, that in a in a very predictable sense, but also wild that I predicted it earlier on the show, Nikolai Ehlers signed since I left. Nikolai Ehlers went to Carolina. So very quickly, we're gonna update Carolina for a second, and then I'll go back to Dallas. Talking about Carolina, now that they have Nikolai Ehlers, yeah, it's cup or bust. I was a little skeptical on going that far with this team. Obviously, they're a great team. Like, they have cup aspirations. I was a little bit, like, hesitant to go that far just with their playoff failings the past couple of years. But you know what? Yeah, they have Nikolai Ehlers. They 100%, like, should... It's them in Florida. One of those two teams is going to make the finals. Florida has been there so many times before. They've been there 3 times in a row. You have to think Carolina, is going to get there once. Hard to say, though. But, yeah, Carolina looks incredibly good. We'll have to see what ends up happening with them. Let's move forward here. Let's go a little bit... Let's try and get through this before my voice completely falls apart. The Dallas Stars. They're... In terms of what they did, they traded away Mason Marchment. They acquired the 126th pick and a 3rd-round pick next year from Marchment. Man, Mason Marchment is a tough guy to lose for them. In limited time, he put up 47 points in 62 games. He was a really good player. I understand why they did it. They need to clear up some cap room to bring some other people back and give themselves a bit of wiggle room. But, like, Marchment, trading him for only a 3rd and a 4th is a really tough thing to have to let go of. He was a really good player in the role he was in, which is the role he could have stayed in. In terms of notable signings and extensions, they re-signed Matt Duchene for 4 years at $4.5 million. They re-signed Nils Lundqvist for 1 year at $1.25. They re-signed Jamie Benn, 1 year, $1 million, but the contract is worth as much as $4 million with bonuses. There is another one of those bonus-laden contracts. And Roddick Fox signs a 3-year, $6 million deal to return to the Dallas Stars. He used to be there long ago. Returned to the Dallas Stars as the 4th-line center. Overall, looking at their offseason, a Jason Robertson trade, while I don't think it's likely at this point, still kind of looms overhead as a possibility. But looking at the team, they look pretty solid, don't they? I mean, it's the same team that just went to the conference finals. I really feel like their big free agency ad was Mikko Rantanen at the deadline. I don't really like the defensive core that they have particularly well. Hopefully they can upgrade that maybe at the deadline if they wanted to, if we're talking about how close they are to a cup, I feel like they are one more defenseman away from the Stanley Cup, but they still have a really good team there, and I think that losing Marchment sucks, but considering the fact they did need to do a bit of a cap crunch, I understand why they did it, and I think that they did okay with what they had. But again, keeping Mason Marchment would have been a lot better than having to trade him away. The Detroit Red Wings, they traded for John Gibson. Now, I mentioned the John Gibson's trade from Anaheim's side. Looking at what Detroit gets out of this, they give up a second and a fourth to do two things. One, they get rid of Peter Mrazek's contract, which is an underrated part of this whole thing. Peter Mrazek sucked, and making 4.25 million, that was a lot of money being taken up by somebody who wasn't good last year. They move on from that while picking up John Gibson, who last year had a bit of a bounce back, a tandem with him, and I honestly can't even remember their other goalie they have right now. I would actually have to look that up, but a tandem with John Gibson is better than what they had before. A John Gibson and Cam Talbot tandem is better than like a Cam Talbot and Peter Mrazek tandem. They upgraded, and that's what they need to do. Even though, as I will point out at the end here, once again, the Detroit Red Wings virtually run back the same core they had the year before, adding a different goalie to the mix for like the third season straight. Vladimir Tarasenko is on the way out the door. They signed him last year in free agency, and with 1 year left on the 2-year contract, they ship him out of town for nothing. This is just a pure cap-clearing move. Tarasenko did not play up to the contract, so the Detroit Red Wings clear his cap space out, which gives them money to do a couple other things. They re-signed Albert Johansson, 2 years, $1.125 million per year. They re-signed Patrick Kane, 1 year, $3 million. Bonuses could have that contract being as much as $7 million. Soderblom re-signs 2 years, 1.125 AAV, and Mason Appleton re-signs a 2-year deal with a $2.9 million AAV. They didn't really take a step forward. Steve Yzerman went out there and said they are going to look into the trade market a little bit, but I assume many teams are going to look into the trade market a little bit. But yeah, not bad work all around from the Red Wings, but you could have asked for a little more. You could have asked for a little bit more there. And speaking of asking for a little bit more, and please forgive me if I sound a little bit salty while talking about this next team, let's talk about the Edmonton Oilers, because I'm annoyed. I'm going to be honest. I am annoyed. They did some good stuff here. Not going to pretend like they didn't. I like the fact that they trade away Evander Kane for the 117th pick. Evander Kane was good in the playoffs, but at the end of the day, that's a lot of money for a guy who did not play in the regular season, and that's also just a lot of money in general. They needed to clear the cap. I got that. Victor Arvidsson, I'm okay with trading him away too. You get a 5th-round pick back for a guy that maybe wasn't even worth the 5th-round pick with how he played, compared to like looking at what like Vladimir Tarasenko going for nothing. The fact that you were able to trade Arvidsson, who had a control over where he was going, for nothing, that's fine. You clear $4 million, and you open up some more money. My problem with the Oilers is that it's okay to lose Evander Kane. It's okay to lose Victor Arvidsson. It's okay to lose Connor Brown. It's okay to lose Corey Perry. There's somebody else they lost to that I can't think of. It's okay to lose these people, but you have to have a plan to make up for it. And the plan to make up for it seemingly is Matt Savoy and Noah Phillip. Not good enough, okay? In terms of contracts they handed out, Trent Frederick re-signed 8 years, 3.85 AAV. Why did he need 8 years, and why did he need so much money? As a fan, I'm not liking that. Kasperi Kapanen, 1 year, $1.3 million. I'm fine with that. He had a couple big goals in the playoffs, even if he wasn't really that good overall. I think I'm all right with him coming back for another shot. Let's see what he has. Evan Bouchard, 4 years, $10.5 million AAV. I can live with the contract. Would I have liked it to be longer term or less money at that term? Yeah, but in a couple years, that contract's going to look okay. And it keeps around our best defenseman for the time being, which is the goal of it all, isn't it? And Andrew Mangiapane. This was a bit of a surprise to me. I really didn't think we'd be adding Andrew Mangiapane, but we did. 2 years, 3.6 AAV. Not bad. Not bad for the player. Goaltending. You needed to do something. You needed to do something with the goaltending here. You really did. I'm sorry. I've always tried to defend Stuart Skinner. It's really hard to. You needed to do something different here, whether it be trading out one of the goalies or even changing up the goalie coach. And so far, you are over 3 on making a decision. You have not done anything. You have not upgraded the goaltending tandem or changed the goaltending tandem in any way. And so you are going into the season with the same weak goaltending, an equal defense to what we had, and a weaker forward core, and you're expecting to get better. And that is just not how this works. And I hope there's some sort of a plan in here that is not the rumored Carter Hart signing, which I don't want to get into. I could talk about my personal feelings on it, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to say this. I do not want to see Carter Hart as an Edmonton Oiler, regardless of the result of the trial. And this is not me necessarily saying, this is not me saying that regardless of what happens, he's guilty. Whatever happens with the trial, happens with the trial. I'm speaking of this from a locker room sense. This team does not need that type of distraction right now, because regardless of what happens, if it's proven that he did it, if he's proven guilty in court, fuck him. Let's make that clear now. Fuck him. If he's acquitted, if they're all let go, I still don't want him on the team, regardless of how good of a goalie he is, or at least was. I still don't want him on the team because he will be a distraction. And Duncan Keith, Evander Kane, and Corey Perry, Stan Bowman, in his own right, have all been distractions and kind of like black holes looming over this team over the past 2 years. And we don't need that anymore. We've moved past the need for that on this team. Also, the outrage of Stan Bowman signs Carter Hart to a contract would be kind of insane. Listen, I'm turning this into a personal rant here. I'm going to kind of transition away from that, but moral of the story is Oilers have not made a significant change in net. I hope that the Carter Hart change is not the one that they're actually trying to make. McDavid's extension. I don't see a reason right now for Connor McDavid to fully extend. I do say that he eventually does extend with the team, because I think with Draisaitl coming back, I think that there is a road there for McDavid to say, okay, let's do like a 3 or 4 year extension. Let's try a couple more years here and see what happens. We did just make back-to-back finals, right? But if I was him, I would not be inspired by anything that just happened here. Nothing that just happened in this offseason would inspire me at all to think that this team could go back. You're a weaker team. You're a weaker team than you were before. And the only nice thing that you can really say about the run to the finals from the team this time is that it was less fluky than it was the year before. Moving past the team that got beat in the finals to the team that won the Stanley Cup, the Florida Panthers. They had, I'm just going to say it, they won the offseason. They did. For starters, they won the Cup, which is a pretty good way to win the offseason before you even have to try. But then they made really good moves on top of that. They traded Justin Sordiff, who was a former third-round pick in 2020, who has played 4 NHL games. They traded him for a second next year and a third the year after. They traded somebody who played 4 NHL games for them that they drafted in the third round 5 years ago for a second and a third. Phenomenal asset management by Bill Zito, and you already know that second and third are going to be flipped for a great player over the next couple of years, and it's going to look like an even worse deal it's going to look even better for them, I should put. Not a worse deal for the other team. I'll get there. It's going to look like a better deal for Florida. In terms of their signings and extensions, they've made 3, and it's 3 good ones. Sam Bennett re-signs 8x8. Aaron Ekblad's back for $6.1 million per year for the next 8 years. And Brad Marchand signs for $5.25 million for the next 6. Winners of the offseason. You brought back a team that just went to back-to-back Stanley Cups, that won back-to-back Stanley Cups, and you still have cap room. You win the offseason. It's quick, it's short. Congratulations, Florida. You win the offseason. they're still the favorites to win the cup. It's them as the favorites. I think you still have to have Edmonton in that competition just because they were just there, right? It's Florida, it's Edmonton. Dallas is still going to pose a bit of a threat, even if it's not as strong. Carolina is probably now the other closest team. I'd say Colorado is still there, but they have more of an outside chance. The other cup contender I really think about off the top of my head once we get to them is Vegas. But yeah, Florida, in my opinion, are still the favorites to win another cup. Until somebody de-seeds them, I don't like betting on the same team to win 3 years straight. But yeah, if any team's going to win a three-peat here, it's going to be them. They've got too many good players to not do it. They just do. Moving past the Florida Panthers, let's talk about the Los Angeles Kings. I just talked about the winners of the offseason. Now let me talk about my loser of the offseason. And, I kind of mentioned how this free agency was boring and how nobody did anything. Maybe, just maybe, it's my fault for getting mad. Because maybe doing nothing is the best offseason you can have. Because if this is what, okay, I tried being diplomatic in the first half of this. I feel like I'm going off the rails now, but you know what? We'll stick with this. We'll see how far it takes me. I feel like Los Angeles is probably the biggest loser of the free agency, and it's because they did way too much. They did a lot. Firstly, they traded Jordan Spence, which I don't think was smart. You only got a 67th pick back and a 6th next year for a guy who in third pairing minutes had 28 points in 79 games. This kid played really, really good. And like you trade him away for practically nothing. At the end of the day. Now, granted, they probably didn't have a spot for him that was guaranteed. That being said, there's some people that you signed this offseason that if you did not sign them, you would have been able to keep Spence and play him in maybe a more elevated role, but you didn't. And now you don't have Jordan Spence, but you do have Cody Ceci, who signs a 4-year contract. Not one, not two, not three, but a 4-year contract at $4.5 million per. That might be the worst contract of the offseason. That might really be it. Andrei Kuzmenko, 1 year at $4.3 million. I've seen people call this an overpay. Honestly, for what he provided, I'm not going to complain about that. Joel Armia, 2.5 for 2 years. A bit much. Corey Perry with a 1-year deal at $2 million, worth as much as $4 million with bonuses. There's another bonus contract. I think that's 4 we're up to now. Cody Ceci's contract we mentioned. Brian Dumoulin, 3 years, $4 million for a third pair defenseman. And Anton Forsberg signs for 2 years at 2.25 per, I should say. Listen, LA just got the full Ken Holland experience in one go. Okay, I don't really feel bad. I don't. I kind of do. We did beat them 4 years straight, and then they hired our old GM, and then our old GM started bringing in players he brought in there on outrageous contracts like they had on Edmonton. So I kind of can laugh. Listen, no, these moves I don't think are going to be what takes LA over the top. I feel like LA did get worse here, despite all the money they spent. And yeah, like I said, this is the full Ken Holland experience. Trading away good young players for nothing, and then signing old guys who don't play the best hockey all around for way too much money. This is Ken Holland, the general manager, in a nutshell. We'll have to see what LA does, but I can't really say that I'm a fan of what they did this offseason. So let's move on to a team that makes me more happy to talk about them, the Minnesota Wild, because I thought the Minnesota Wild actually had a fairly quiet but alright offseason. You traded for Frederic Gauthier, or sorry, I messed up my notes. No, they acquired the 102nd pick in the draft for Frederic Gauthier, or Goudreau, sorry, not Gauthier, Frederic Goudreau. They honestly, I feel like they could have gotten a bit more. It's a guy who put up 37 points in 82 games, but they do get off of the contract there. It had 3 years remaining at 2.1, so you do clear up a little bit of money and clear up a bit of flexibility going forward. You acquire Vladimir Tarasenko for nothing, which, in my opinion, is a win for them. Because while Tarasenko did underperform, if he can even bounce back to being a 45-point player for you, which he had 33 last year, is that really too unrealistic? At 4.75, that's not bad at all, and you gave up nothing to do it. In terms of signings, they brought in Nico Sturm, or back Nico Sturm, 2 years at $2 million per. It was a quiet offseason, but I like the team that's there already. The only question that's still kind of up in the air with them is the Marco Rossi situation. Talks were that they wanted to trade him away. Are they going to try and pull that off? Personally speaking, I don't get the Marco Rossi hate. I thought, you look at the numbers. The kid had a good year. And yes, he's a little bit of an undersized forward, but he clearly has the talent. And man, oh man, do you need an offensive dynamo to play with Kirill Kaprizov? Make that Marco Rossi. I'm kind of annoyed that that's the direction they're heading in, because I really feel like Marco Rossi could be a part of their young core. I could also see them trying to trade him at high value, though. So I would like them to keep Marco Rossi, but I could see if they are looking to trade him away. We'll have to see how that ends up playing out. I don't think that that'll play out today. I hope it doesn't play out today, or else this is going to be more dated again. But yeah, that's Minnesota for you. Meanwhile, in Montreal, this is a winner of the offseason too. This team did good this offseason, and I will stand by that. Firstly, the Noah Dobson trade. They acquired Noah Dobson for Emil Heineman, 16 and 17 in the draft, and they got Noah Dobson at an 8-year deal at $9.5 million. Noah Dobson can be the number one defenseman for this team now. Lane Hudson is the offensive dynamo, your number one offensive defenseman, but if you're looking for a guy who can play those last few minutes of the game, reliable defense, crunch time minutes, that's what you got in Noah Dobson. I feel like Noah Dobson, his perception has been affected by what I like to call the Evan Bouchard syndrome, and I kind of glazed over that with Bouchard when talking about him, where he can play really good, but there's a couple bad moments that are going to be thrown out into the atmosphere, and it kind of dampens you on him as a player. Listen, Noah Dobson played on a New York Islanders team that didn't score a lot of goals. He had 39 points in 71 games as a two-way defenseman, mind you. Like, him on the top pair being a supplementary defenseman beside a guy like Lane Hudson, that is going to be fine. I've seen a lot of Montreal fans comparing him, saying that this is like the next Jeff Petrie for them. I could kind of see that in a way, and I feel like that would be okay at the rate of what they trade for him. Listen, I think that Noah Dobson really helps that D-core go over the top. It was a weaker D-core, and I feel like it just got a lot better by picking up Noah Dobson. Along with that, and like they didn't give up a lot for him either. Heineman is a solid prospect, don't get me wrong. But 10 goals in 62 games, it's not like you're giving up a star here. And while the Islanders did make good with the 2 picks that the Canadiens sent them, the Canadiens didn't need those picks. They're starting to go for it. They're starting to contend a little bit. You can argue the rebuild is over. In Montreal, it is time to start winning games routinely. And I think the Noah Dobson trade helps with that. And I also think the other trade they made does as well. They traded Logan Mailloux for Zachary Bolduc. Now, Logan Mailloux has been a very complex prospect to pay attention to. We all remember when he was drafted by Marc Bergevin in 2021. That obviously being the year that he asked not to be drafted by anybody because he was wrapped up in a sexual harassment / assault scandal. I believe it was he recorded footage of him and a girl without her consent and showed it to friends. He was wrapped up in all that and found guilty of it, mind you, and it kind of was exposed. Now, I will give credit to Logan Mailloux. Not gonna give him full credit, okay, because he still did the fucked up thing. But at least in comparison to some of these other horrifying stories we're seeing from hockey, he at least made something resembling an effort to, earn back trust and regain a reputation and apologize for what he did, which is, again, something that is so rare in these situations in hockey. But between that and also the on-ice problems with Logan Mailloux, mainly his lack of defensive ability, the Montreal Canadiens decided to move on, pick up Zachary Bolduc, who is a near 20-goal winger from this past year with the Blues. I like this deal for Montreal. You needed a bit of extra goal scoring in your bottom six. You bring in Zachary Bolduc, and you didn't have a spot for Logan Mailloux. You trade away a surplus for a need, and Zachary Bolduc can be a good fit to fill the need. So yeah, I like the trade for the Montreal Canadiens. Um, they really only made one signing, and that was Capo Kakinen, and he played one game, had a 800 save percentage, and they gave him 1 year, 1.15 million. He'll be a depth goalie for them, a third goalie mainly. Yeah, this team got better. Bolduc and Dobson are going to help make this team better, and I would not go as far to say that they are a cup contender by any means, but this past year, the Montreal Canadiens were a wild card team, and if by this time or by the end of the season you told me that they were in a divisional spot in the Eastern Conference, hell, you could even sell me on the idea that this team plays really well during the regular season and maybe even wins the division, in a division where Toronto will take a step back, in a division where Tampa Bay and Florida are more worried about just making the playoffs and going from there, with the rest of the Atlantic Division that kind of looks a little bit discombobulated in places. You could probably sell me on the idea of the Montreal Canadiens taking a shot at winning the division, just throwing that out there. Let's move on to the Nashville Predators now. This puzzling team. Eric Holla. They traded away a prospect by the name of Hansel, who, no offense to him, but I did just write instead of his stats non-factor beside his name. They traded Hansel away for the 99th pick in Eric Holla. They took on $3.15 million by taking on Holla, but they add an okay depth player and a draft pick for a prospect in their organization who probably wasn't going to work out. So decent asset management deal there from Barry Trotz. Maybe you can even get a bit more out of Holla. Meanwhile, speaking on the asset management part of things here, this is a fascinating trade. Nick Hague is going to Nashville. Nick Hague and a 2027 third, upgraded to a second if Vegas wins 2 rounds in the playoffs, for Jeremy Lauzon and Colton Sissons, with 50% of the cap retained on the final year of his contract. The Nashville Predators acquire Hague, immediately signed him to a 4-year contract worth $5.5 million per year. This is in a way a bit of a shuffling deck chairs type deal. Nick Hague is okay, but he's really just a third pair defenseman that you're paying $5.5 million to. Not the best contract from the Nashville Predators for Nick Hague. You didn't really lose a whole ton in Sissons and Lauzon, and you did add a draft pick. A bit of a weird deal here for the Nashville Predators. I don't really know how to fully read it. It screams we're trying to add the best player while also adding a draft pick. And that's just a really complicating kind of setup to be running with. Their only notable signing was Nicholas Perbix, getting 2 years at $2.75 million. And all of this just kind of leads me to my overall thought on the Nashville Predators. Barry Trotz is not the best GM, okay? He's not. Great coach, phenomenal coach, Barry Trotz is. He joins the school of Mike Keenan, where he is a good head coach who should not be a general manager because the way he builds a team as a GM is not helping the organization. He's kind of just doing stuff and hoping it works out. And I know that that's not really great analysis, but honestly, I don't know how else to look at what this team's doing. They, last offseason, go out there and sign Jonathan Marchessault, Steven Stamkos, and Brady Shea to ridiculously high money contracts. Nothing works for the Predators. The forward core, the defense, the goaltending, nothing works for them. This offseason, he does a lot more smaller stuff. But again, he brings in Nick Hague and pays him a ton of money. And when he does his press conference, he says, well, the hope is Stamkos, Marchessault, some of the offensive guns can come back to form. And it's like, you kind of have to hope that, because if that doesn't happen, I don't know what this team is. And even with that, I just feel like this team does not have a direction right now, and it is really, really crippling them, not having a vision forward for what's next. So we'll see what ends up happening with the Nashville Predators in the future, but I do not like what the current construction of that team is right now. And I think that they are bound to kind of just repeat the cycle of what they did this year without many changes. Up next, we've got the New Jersey Devils. Speaking of the Eric Holla trade, I don't mind this deal for them either. They clear up some money to be able to go into free agency, and as we would find out, they do end up using that money, which is a bit of a rare case in terms of free agent pickup. A lot of teams moved money to re-sign people. This is the rare case of a team moving money to bring people in. They moved on from Eric Holla, cleared up his money. He wasn't the most like highly sought after offensive performer for them. It's not like their depth is ripped apart by losing him. They give up a pick, and yeah, they didn't do too bad with that. Also, by the way, I may have to correct myself again. Yes, the 99th pick in the draft, my apologies, it went to New Jersey. So the Predators traded a pick and Hansel for Hollis, so I can't defend that trade as much. And for the Devils, yeah, I love that trade because they got a pick and a body, but a prospect, for a guy that was in their bottom six, putting up 21 points in 69 games. You can't complain about that. Looking at their notable signings, they re-signed Jake Allen, who was probably the best goalie on the market in free agency. 5-year deal at 1.8 per, an interesting contract. I think it's a fine contract for Jake Allen. He's going to get his $9 million regardless, and it's a good contract for the Devils. They get to spread that money out a little bit. Connor Brown is going to be making $3 million over next per season for the next 4 years. I like the Connor Brown pickup by the New Jersey Devils. After his playoff run, you may argue he's a little bit overpaid based on his regular season stats. He had a really good playoff run, though. So, as an Oilers fan, I'm happy to see him go off and get his bag. And I think that in New Jersey system, he can probably do better than he did last year. 30 points in 82 games. He can probably get that up a little bit, maybe to being a 40-point player, if I'm being honest. Speaking of a 40-point player, Evgeny Dadonov also joins the New Jersey Devils. 1 year, $1 million, worth as much as $3.25 million with bonuses. That's a solid depth pickup as well. And then they bring back Cody Glass for 2 years at 2.5 per. Listen, I like these. I like what the Devils did this offseason. I do. I don't think that the Devils are a cup-winning team, but I think they're one of those teams who is on the cusp of breaking the glass ceiling to get into that spot. I like their moves. They added some depth to flush out the roster a little bit. Can they stay healthy? That is going to be the biggest possible question that we can ask about them. Can they actually stay healthy this year? Up next, we have the New York Islanders. I apologize for having a cough there, by the way. I'm telling you this right now. I am not going to be able to talk tomorrow. The New York Islanders. Listen, here's the thing. I actually like a lot of what the Islanders did here. I'm just confused as to what they think their vision is. And I'll get to that after I wrap it all up here. Let's start with the Noah Dobson trade. Noah Dobson, trade away. They pick up Emil Heineman, the 16th and 17th pick. I went over those guys, talked about the draft. Emil Heineman can be a decent forward, and I think there's potential for him to get up to being a 20-goal scorer for them. They just have to be giving him some time. And it was just yesterday that they signed him to a 2-year extension, $1.1 million per year. So not a bad contract for Heineman. Listen, Dobson wanted out of the Islanders. It was pretty clear. It was pretty obvious he didn't want to be there anymore. So being able to move him out and get this back, not too bad. Like I said, Heineman can grow into being that middle six forward for them. This deal would be looked at a lot better if there was a deal swung on draft night for Eklund and Atchison, those two picks, to be traded for the pick that would end up being James Hagen's. But I still think that this is going to be a good deal for the Islanders overall. I think they added good value for Dobson. I think they added some young pieces, which are desperately needed on an older Islanders team. Speaking of older Islanders team, Kyle Palmieri resigns. 2 years, 4.75 per. Alex Romanov resigns for 8 years at $50 million altogether. That's 6.25 per year. Tony DeAngelo, 1 year, 1.75. They add David Riddick for a year at $1 million. Jonathan Drouin signs with the Islanders for 2 years at 4. Simone Holmstrom comes back for 2 years at 3.625. And Maxim Shabanov, the top KHL free agent in this free agency class, comes over. A 1-year minimum contract, but with salary bonuses, signing bonuses, $4.475 million is possible. I'm confused by this team's vision. You trade Noah Dobson away, get the young pieces in. You don't exactly have a great roster to begin with. That would signal rebuilding. There's talks of you trading Barzell. That would signal rebuilding. You bring back Palmieri, you re-sign Romanov long-term, okay. You bring back Holmstrom, you sign Jonathan Drouin, okay. I feel like the case is more so to be made that this team is entering into a rebuild, but I feel like they may be fighting the rebuild as they're entering into it. I could see a world where I'm proven wrong by that. Jonathan Drouin is the perfect sign him for 2 years and then trade him next offseason if he can have a good year type of candidate. Tony DeAngelo is a good play him throughout the year, see if he can put up a lot of points, being the top power play guy on the Islanders, and then ship him off at the deadline for something. They have guys they can do that with. Kyle Palmieri, the same story. I just hope that their plan is not to actually try and contend with this core, because I don't really think it's a core that's going to get you too far. I get that they were in the playoffs a couple years ago, but that was their peak. Since the 2021 year, their peak has been with that core. We're going to try and make the playoffs and go from there. And it hasn't worked for them. So I'm kind of hoping that they are going in the rebuilding direction, because I think that they already have a good foundation for that with the number 1 pick. I'm thinking a rebuild could really help put them over the top in the future. Moving on to the New York Rangers, and here is another fascinating team. Chris Kreider is on the move. Moving up in the draft, 15 spots from 89 to 104. They added Casey Terrence, who had 20 goals in 45 games with the Erie Otters this past year. They traded a guy who underperformed for them without having to retain salary, and they cleared out that money. They added, a prospect. They added a higher pick. Would you have liked it if Chris Kreider scored 40 goals for you this past year and you could have kept him? Yeah, of course you would have. You would have liked the new Lamborghini too now, wouldn't you? But they made the best of what they had, and they cleared off the money for a guy who did not live up to expectations. So I can't really say they did bad. Keandre Miller is going to Carolina. We covered it with Carolina earlier. They trade Miller for Scott Morrow, a first and a second. Scott Morrow looks like a really good prospect, so I don't really think that you can complain about that too much. And they did get good assets. This was clearly a Rangers thing. Clearly, the Rangers are... The Rangers feel emotional, in a way, if that makes sense. Because they have no problem trading away people that they do not think fit in, even if they are giving up good talents. There's a lot of teams across the league who aren't doing that, so I guess I do commend them in a way for that. But Keandre Miller felt like a guy who is good enough to be on that team right now and make an impact, but they did not think that he would be a part of that. So they trade him away for picks and a prospect, and honestly, they didn't do too bad. They got a decent haul here, so I don't think you can complain. My only problem with him is that you trade away Keandre Miller and then you sign Vladislav Gavrikov to a 7x7 contract. I'm just going to go out there and say it. Vladislav Gavrikov, biggest boom or bust player in this free agency class by far. Gavrikov very well could prove to be a decent top 4 defenseman. He could very well prove to be it. I have not liked his numbers fully. I haven't fully understood the hype around Gavrikov being the big-time defenseman that he has been turned into. I feel like this contract has a lot of potential to possibly go wrong fairly quickly. Hopefully it's not, obviously, and I'm happy for Gavrikov getting his bag. It's just I'm a little bit skeptical as to how good the player is and if he can live up to the contract. Will Coley signs for 2 years at $3.9 million per. That's a decent deal for the RFA. And Taylor Radish joins New York, 2 years, $1.5 per. Decent depth forward there, picking up him from Washington. Overall thoughts on the Rangers. I feel like the conversations already came and went, but I will throw it out there. Kreider, Trouba, Goudreau. The Rangers are not exactly making themselves an ideal spot for free agents to go to with how they are treating guys they have on a no-move clause. That being said, Vladislav Gavrikov had no problem joining them. I don't feel like they're better. I don't feel like getting rid of Chris Kreider, not replacing him, and then replacing Miller with Gavrikov makes you a better team. I just don't think that that's the case. I feel like this team needs a bit more forward depth. I feel like they could really do with signing one of the guys that's remaining. I feel like if you put an Anthony Beauvillier or a Roslovic or I know they already had Roslovic, but Roslovic again, or Olofsson, if you added an extra piece to that forward core, I feel like that would look like a lot better of a team than what it is right now, but we'll have to see what they do. Moving on to the Ottawa Senators, who, again, fairly quiet offseason here. A lot of smaller ads. They acquired Jordan Spence. I like this deal for Ottawa. They could use an extra defenseman on the back end, somebody who can play the puck a little bit too. They add him for a third and a sixth, 67th, so it's a high third, but a third and a sixth, that's not bad at all. If he can play better in an expanded role, this is going to be a great deal for the Sens. They re-signed Tyler Cleveland for 2 years at 1.6. They re-signed Fabian Zetterlund for 3 years at 4.275 per year. They re-signed Claude Giroux for 1 year at $2 million. It could be worth as much as 4.75 with bonuses. And they add Lars Eller to be a fourth-line center for 1 year at 1.25. They made some moves. They made a couple moves. They kind of, looked at the deck chairs again, shuffled things around a little bit, right? Nothing too bad. Nothing too bad for them. They really only added Lars Eller and Jordan Spence, and I think that's not bad. They did need a fourth-line center. They did need one. Listen, they're betting on development. They're betting on Stützle getting better. They're betting on, guys like Batherson staying in form, maybe getting better. Brady staying in form or getting better, right? They're looking at a guy like Shane Pinto. Maybe Pinto's got a bit more to offer. They're looking at a guy like Dylan Cousins, who they just brought in to say, all right, you've had some time to acquit yourself here. Now let's see what you got. Sanderson, I think, will take a step up. You're looking at a guy like Shabbat to just continue being what he is. They have a lot of solid pieces there. They just need to get the development a little bit more going, get a bit more experience under their belt. I think that Ottawa team can still be a problem. I think they can still be a playoff team, too. Moving forward, I might need to get some water here. But after I get a drink of water, then we're moving on to the Philadelphia Flyers. The Philadelphia Flyers added Trevor Zegras over the offseason. They acquired Zegras for Ryan Poehling, 45 and a fourth, as I mentioned earlier when talking about Anaheim. Listen, young team, rebuilding. What do you need? Flash. What do you need to play with a goal-scoring forward in Matvei Michkov? A playmaker like Zegras. This is a good fit. This is a good fit for Trevor Zegras. And if Trevor Zegras does have that extra level of potential to untap, this is where he can do it. This is a good spot for him. He can be the number one center on this team. Number two, maybe number two. Couturier is number one. He can be number two, playing with Michkov, get the offense going. I think that Zegras can be a really good fit here, and I think Zegras can find that final form, that prior form back. We'll see what ends up happening with him, though. In terms of extensions and stuff, Tyson Forster's back for 2 years of 3.75. Noah Cates is back on a 4x4. They add Christian Dvorak, 1 year, 5.4. I don't hate the signing at all. Gives them a bit more center depth, gives them something to work with. They add Dan Vladar, who, when July 1st came around and 12 p.m. hit, was the best goalie out there on the market. At a 3.35 AAV is a bit rich for the 898 save percentage, but it is what it is. Listen, they did get better. On paper, they got better. Their goaltending tandem's better. Their defense is about the same. Their forward core got better. They added Dvorak and Zegras. Lost Poehling. They did better. They are a better team than they were before. Do I think they're a playoff team? No. Do they think they're a playoff team? Probably not. But they did add better players. They did improve the team. I don't think that you can complain about a team getting better. I just don't think it's possible to do that. Moving on to the Pittsburgh Penguins. I really do like the work the Pittsburgh Penguins did this offseason. I think that they did some tidy business. And I know that liking what Kyle Dubas does is kind of, it turns him into a nerd. I'll probably, glasses will appear on me automatically within the next 5 seconds. But I think that, the Penguins did all right. I like the Connor Clifton pickup, not exactly for the player, but I like the idea that they got a really good asset for a bad contract considered in Clifton, who, honestly, isn't horrible to begin with. I like the fact they were able to move on from Nedeljkovic for a third. Considering how not great Nedeljkovic was, getting a third out of him is fine for the Penguins. They bring back Tomansinu, 1 year, 1.75. Is there something more there with Tomansinu? Maybe. 24 points in 61 games doesn't show it, but he could get better still. He's a former first. I'm not going to doubt him until at least he's 25, to be honest. Connor Dewar, 10 points in 48 games. He's nothing special, but he can be on the fourth line. Justin Brazeau, Dubas picks up the project that he had when he was in Toronto, the 6'6" forward. I like Justin Brazeau. We'll see if he can live up to that $1.5 million contract or not. And Anthony Mantha, coming off of an injury that kept him out for all but 13 games last year, can Anthony Mantha take a step, come back from injury, maybe find some old form? This is not the it's solid low risk ads and good asset management. That's what their offseason is. They didn't splash, they didn't do anything crazy like they did in prior years under Dubas. They just kind of took it real easy, went through the motions. I feel like there could be something else here in terms of a trade because Erik Karlsson's already had his name out in rumors. Brian Rust has had his name out in rumors, and while his campus came out and declined it, it's looking very apparent that Colorado are dead set on acquiring Sidney Crosby. They are. The Colorado Avalanche want Sidney Crosby. They are living an 87 sized gap on their forward core for Sidney Crosby. I feel like it could be possible, especially with Evgeny Malkin not being extended at the end of the year by the Penguins, that being announced. I feel like Sidney Crosby could see himself on the way out of Pittsburgh at the end of next year, maybe even before that. It really does depend. I think Crosby, if he had it his way, would stick around like Lemieux did. I think that he will really try to do that, but I think he might also end up getting tempted by the idea of winning a cup with Nathan MacKinnon, that he might just leave. On to our next team, and we're into the final, I want to say, we're into the final 10 teams, I think, which, man, we have a lot of teams in the back half of the alphabet. I know that's a really random thought, but we're on to San Jose. Alex Nedeljkovic is a backup goalie. I feel like they paid a bit much to get him in a third, but you acquire a backup for Askarov, it's okay. In terms of contracts, they signed William Eklund to a 3-year extension kicking in next year at 5.6. That's honestly a really good rate for William Eklund. You signed Philip Khrushchev 1 year, 1.2. You add John Klingberg for 1 year at $4 million. You pay him so you can hit the cap floor. You add Adam Gaudette for 2 years at $2 million. 19 goals in 81 games for Adam Gaudette. I think there's potential for him to recapture that, and if he can, that's not a bad player to have at $2 million. Dmitry Orlov, 2 years, 6.5 per. That's not bad. They need to hit the cap floor. They need to hit the cap floor, okay? They needed to hit the cap floor pretty badly. And Dmitry Orlov can help them with that. Also, he's a defenseman who is better than what they had in there before. Now, they also buy out the last year of Marc-Edouard Vlasic's contract this offseason. They also claim Nick Leddy off waivers. He makes $4 million for 1 year. Again, hit that cap floor, won't you? I feel like they need one more tank here. I do like some of the pieces they have on their forward core, and I do think that their defense is starting to get better. I think adding Orlov does help it a bit. I still feel like they need one more year to get a good prospect at the end of it all. Gavin McKenna, anybody? And then I think next year you've got to look at it and say, okay, it's the 2026 offseason. Is there a good player out there that can help put this team over the top? Let's try contending next year. Let's try getting into the playoffs next year and building from there. I think that that's what the direction of the San Jose Sharks should be. We'll see if Mike Greer agrees with me when I make that claim. Up next, we have the Seattle Kraken. And again, I'll just say it off the bat here. I'll say it. I have no idea what this team is. This is if you want to know what this is a hockey team right here. They acquire Mason Marchment for a third and a fourth. I like the deal a lot for Seattle. They pick up a good player, and, they don't really have to pay anything for it. Andrei Burakovsky, they trade him away for Joe Veleno. They end up buying out Joe Veleno. So this was a pure cost-cutting method. So you trade away Burakovsky to be able to get Mason Marchment. That's not bad. That's an upgrade. It is an upgrade. But yeah, kind of sucks that Burakovsky didn't pan out with the Kraken. That would have been a nice story, but Mason Marchment's here now, so Burakovsky out the door. Frederick Gaudreau, you acquire for the 102nd pick in the draft. Decent depth forward who puts up good numbers, and is somewhat defensively responsible. They also signed Ryan Lindgren in free agency for 4 years at 4.5. I'd rather have Ryan Lindgren than Cody Ceci, so you're making an improvement there. Listen, this team doesn't have an identity. They don't. I don't know what this team is. They kind of just... It's a Ron Francis team. this team really does have a lot of comparisons to the Carolina Hurricanes circa 2017, where they have a lot of pieces, a lot of solid pieces, but they lack true goal scoring. They lack true offensive power, and they also don't have. Well, Joey Decord's solid, but the Philip Grubauer contract is an anchor that they currently are working with. It's a weird team. It's a weird team. I don't feel like they're a playoff team. I feel like they are a team that's right in the middle, which again, very much like the Carolina Hurricanes circa 2017. They are floating in the middle, existing, and that is what their identity is. Which might be, I feel like I'm being harsh, but I'm also not true. I feel like I'm being pretty accurate here. Moving on, we got the St. Louis Blues. Another team that really didn't do a lot, but their name is swirling around the Bowen Byram conversation, so that very well could change. They make a couple different moves. Firstly, they acquire Logan Mailloux for Zach Bolduc. We talked about Montreal's end of this. From St. Louis's perspective, their defensive prospects are a little bit on the weaker end, so you add somebody that can throw their name in that hat. If Mailloux does develop, he can be a really good offensive defenseman for you. But he needs to develop that defensive game somewhat. The offense is not good enough right now that the defense can be as poor as it is. They do have to give up Zach Bolduc to do it, but I can see why they did it. Take away from a strength and add to a weakness. They can probably afford to lose Bolduc after signing Suter to 2 years at $4.125 million. They can probably afford the loss of Bolduc. Nick Bjugstad's also there for 2 years at $1.75. That's not a bad contract for him. He can be a decent fourth line type guy. And Joel Hoffer resigns for 2 years at $3.4 million. Probably one of the more reputable young backups in the league right now. I think a lot of teams could have offer sheeted him if he had made it. I really would have loved if Edmonton offer sheeted him, and I think St. Louis, they even made reference to that in the Twitter announcement that he had signed. They said, oh yeah, not going to be offer sheeted. Yeah, screw you too, St. Louis. We're so happy to see you. Listen, they got better, technically. I think Suter's an upgrade over Bolduc. Adding Bjugstad makes them better in depth. But they didn't really get good enough to the point where I'm saying, this team's going to win a round next year after how they played this year. They played well against Winnipeg. I just don't think that they have what it takes to make it another round. I don't think that they can get to the second round with this core. I feel like they're missing something. I feel like they might be missing a top defenseman, to be honest. I feel like they have some solid blue liners, but I feel like they're missing that true number one, and that might be their holdback. But yeah, the St. Louis Blues, they're okay. Not the best, not the worst. They're okay. Moving on to the Tampa Bay Lightning. The Tampa Bay Lightning, they didn't do a lot, did they? They did re-sign Yanni Gourde for 6 years at $2.33 million per season. So, good cap hit. That's a really good cap hit for Yanni Gourde, even if the contract is forever. They re-signed Gage Concalves to a 2-year, $1.2 million AAV. He had a decent playoff run for them, so I don't really think you can complain. Meanwhile, Pontus Holmberg signs a 2-year, $1.55 million AAV deal, which, again, not bad for Pontus Holmberg. He can be a decent bottom six forward for you. They're taking a couple bets on guys who maybe can do better than what they are expected to do. The big thing that's still looming over them right now is the Isaac Howard trade. Will they trade his rights away? There was an idea that Edmonton may have worked out a deal for it. Apparently that has fallen through. You never really know. This team is staying the course. They are staying the course. They are riding this core out, seeing what they can get out of their guys. And I don't know if they're going to be able to get another title out of the Kucherov, Point, Vasilevsky, Hedman combo. But I think they're still going to be a solid regular season team. Moving forward, again, we get to one of the more interesting teams this offseason. The Toronto Maple Leafs. Yeah. They had an offseason. They did have an offseason. We'll start with the nice stuff. They added Matias Maccelli. They added him for a third-round pick in 2027 that upgrades to a 2029 second if Toronto makes if Toronto makes the playoffs and Maccelli gets 51 points, which is very specific. If he can bounce back to his prior form, good deal for Toronto. right? Like, if he can get back to where he was a couple years ago, where he was a 50, 60-point player, this is a great deal for Toronto. This is a great low buy. If he doesn't, it doesn't look as good. If you're getting 18 points in 55 games for that third, it's not great. But the Leafs are buying low for a reason. This guy can be a Marner-esque player, so you're just hoping he can come in and somewhat supplement Mitch Marner. You're never going to replace Mitch Marner, but you can supplement him. They re-signed John Tavares for 4 years at $17.553 million. That's a 4.388 AAV. And yes, a lot of numbers there that don't mean a lot. Matthew Nyes resigns for 6 years with a 7.75 AAV. And Steven Lorentz signs for 3 with an AAV of 1.35. And that is me very easily going past the biggest move that they made, which was losing Mitch Marner. The Leafs have lost Mitch Marner. The core 4 era in Toronto is dead. They trade Mitch Marner's rights, or more so sign and trade him, giving up giving him the 8-year deal at $12 million. They sign and trade him to the Vegas Golden Knights in exchange for Nick Waugh. Firstly, for a sign and trade, good value. To get back a roster player, good value. Secondly, I'm very fascinated to see the article that comes out in 10 or 15 years about the tampering stuff, because there was clearly something going on with how it was reported. There was something going on with the tampering with the Leafs and the Vegas Golden Knights going for Marner. And honestly, we've already heard a part of it. Marner doing his press conference talking about how, he's been talking with Vegas players and stuff like that, and how he kind of wanted to be here a while back. I feel like that might be part of what the Leafs were going to say. Like, hey, this guy's been wanting to go here since, like, middle of our season, so why did that happen? Listen. Mitch Marner is a fascinating player. He's one of the best wingers in the league right now, but he kind of just shrivels up into a ball when the playoffs begin. He just does not play the same hockey in the playoffs that he does in the regular season. We'll have to see if he fixes that with Vegas. But I think at the end of the day for Toronto, while it hurts to lose Mitch Marner, hurts to lose his production, hurts to lose the person, this team needed a change. They needed a DNA change. They needed a culture shock. And losing Mitch Marner offers you that. You've added a couple players that can bolster your lineup, that can supplement a bit, right? Supplementary offense. I feel like they are still a forward away. They were a team that really wanted to go for Nikolai Ehlers. By the way, you have to feel bad for Brad Treliving. So many years, so many times he's going for the big name free agent, and Nazem Kadri was the only one he got. Is there a trade here to be made to maybe bring in a better forward? Do you go out there and sign a Jack Roslovic or an Anthony Beauvillier, somebody to supplement and give you a bit more depth? I feel like the Leafs need to pick up something more, because when you take a look at that bottom 6, offensively, that's weak. You need something more in that bottom 6 to really put yourselves over as an actual, team, like a championship caliber team. They need something more on that offensive core if they want this to be a year where they can actually go for it. So I think that they could make another move here. We'll see how this team does without Mitch Marner being there, and we'll see how they can do taking a few low buys on a guy like Michelli to see if he can bounce back into prior form. We're down to our last 5 teams to talk about here, so let's move on to the Utah Mammoth. I apologize. Good Lord, you can tell my voice is on its last legs. It's really trying to survive for you people for the entertainment factor. Utah, or the hopeful entertainment factor. The Utah Mammoth acquire J.J. Peterka for Josh Doan and Michael Kessler. We mentioned that when talking about Buffalo. This is a great deal for the Utah Mammoth. Kesslering is a good defenseman who's only making like $1.6 million per year, I think. So you do lose a good cost-controlled defenseman. But man, the Utah Mammoth needed one more high-impact offensive player. And adding Peterka and then signing him for 7.7 over the next 5 years, yeah, that's good. I really like this move for the Utah Mammoth. And then, to open up a roster spot for Peterka, they move on from Matias Maselli. Weak year last year. Could he have bounced back? Yes, but I think that is what that second-round pick's for. You get a little bit of extra compensation if he does. You add a third and clear up $3.425 million. And then you open up that roster spot. And on top of that, you get to go into free agency and still add some guys. defense. They had Brandon Tanev on a 3-year deal at $2.5 million per. Good bottom six forward. He can be physical. He can play some defensive action for you. He's not bad. Nick Schmidt signs a 3-year deal at $3.5 million per season. You can argue that's a little bit overpaid, but that's what happens when you win a Stanley Cup. You get paid extra money. So that's not a horrible deal for Nick Schmidt. Not the worst defensive contract out there, but, I think it will age to be one of those deals where in the final year they look to move on from it for future considerations because he's just getting overpaid. He's getting paid too much. I think we could see that happen. And Vitek Vanacek signs for 1 year at 1.5, but I doubt he even is part of the goaltending rotation. Listen, they added depth, and they added some star power. They had Tanev and Schmidt as depth. They had Paterka as a star. This team got better in a good way, and I think that there's a dang good chance that this team goes out and makes the playoffs this year. They've been kind of in that conversation for a bit now. They were just on the doorstep of being in the conversation. I think they were one of the best 3 teams in the West not to make it. This team very well can make it to the playoffs this upcoming year. It's just going to be a matter of can they get over that last little bit that they need to clear to get to that point. And I think that they are getting really, really close to it. So we're going to have to see how it all plays out, but I do think the Utah Mammoth can get better this year. I think that with the pickups they made, they're going to be a better team. I think that this could be the year Utah gets into the playoffs for the first time. In their second year in Utah, in their first year as the Mammoth, it wouldn't be too bad. I would feel really sorry for Coyotes fans, though. 2 years after the team leaves, they finally make the playoffs in a non-bubble situation. That would kind of suck. I'm going to do one more pause in this recording because I already made 3. I've already made a couple more pauses than I thought I was going to make. I just need some water. I just need to not talk for 5 or 10 minutes, and I need there to not be another free agent signing while all this is happening. And we'll be okay, and we can ride this off into the end. And so when I come back, Vancouver Canucks, you're up next. The Vancouver Canucks, for the most part, just decided to bring people back, but they did make one addition. They did trade for Evander Kane. They acquired Evander Kane for the 117th pick in the draft. Listen, as somebody who watched Evander Kane on the Oilers for a while, he can be decent. He can be a power forward. He can put up 20 or 30 goals. Maybe 25 is more realistic in a year. Like, he can be a good forward for the Canucks. Knowing he has a reputation of not being the best in the locker room should possibly be something on the Canucks' radar, considering the fact last year their entire season crashed out because things in the locker room were not exactly great. But I think he can bring that extra competitive edge there. I think that he can bring some goals to the table. I think he can be good. It is a bit of a bet, obviously, especially with that cap hit, 5.125 is not nothing. But I think that they do have something that they can get out of him. So I'm going to be interested to see how it is going forward with Evander Kane on the Canucks. In terms of who they brought back and stuff, Derek Forbort signed an extension with them for 1 year at $2 million. Brock Besser, who was one of the better forwards on the market, signs a 7-year deal at $7.25 million per with the Canucks. So he's not going anywhere. And Thatcher Demko extends with them starting next year. He'll be making $8.5 per year for 3 years. Connor Garland will be on a 6x6 starting next season as well. They're running it back. The Vancouver Canucks, who a couple years ago made the playoffs, lost to the Oilers in the second round in 7 games. The Canucks, who missed the playoffs this year entirely, they are choosing to run it back. It is an interesting choice, and it does have a lot of possibility of backfiring on them. I think that the Vancouver Canucks do have a lot of talent there. They need Elias Pettersson to bounce back for sure for this team to be able to get back to that spot, because Pettersson has not been himself for a while now. They need him. This is like his last chance, I would say, to get to that point where he can prove he's worth that second opportunity. He's worth that last. He needs to prove he can be a number 1 center again before we can start saying the Vancouver Canucks are going to be this really good team. But at the same time, I take a look at the depth. It's pretty good there. They've got good pieces, man. The Vancouver Canucks could be a team to get back into the playoffs. I think that you have to consider them a team in the hunt. It's just, I don't, aside from Evander Kane, they didn't really add anything. They need a lot of things to go right for them, and with Quinn Hughes, that whole situation kind of looming in the background, you have to think there's a bit of worry on them. Meanwhile, moving on to the Vegas Golden Knights. We talked about the Nick Hague trade earlier with Nashville. From Vegas' perspective, they move on from Nick Hague, who wanted a bit too much money for what he was. They get two depth players who, sure, Lozon's not really all that great, and Sissons is just okay. They are making less money than Hague is combined, and I think you have to see that as a good thing. They re-signed Riley Smith for $2 million for the year. Same contract for Brandon Saad. They extend Caden Korzak for 4 years, starting next year at $3.25 million. Oh, and they add Mitch Marner as well. Listen, so for starters, sucks to lose Nick Waugh, but you needed to clear up cap somehow, and he was a obvious cap casualty. So you really just move on from him to be a cap casualty. In exchange for moving on from him, you get Marner for an 8th year, which brought that cap hit down to 12, which is still a lot, but it is lower. Listen, Mitch Marner during the regular season as a Vegas Golden Knight, by the time this contract is over, has a chance to be considered one of the best Golden Knights of all time. It is a new organization, so, you know, maybe that's an obvious thing to say. But Mitch Marner is he is an incredible player. He is arguably a top 10 player in this league. I think he is a top 10 player. You could even argue if he has a good season here, he could be top 5. But for that conversation to really be had, he needs to deliver in the playoffs. He has not been the guy in the playoffs. And while there might not be as much media pressure in Vegas as there was in Toronto, trust me when I say there is organizational pressure at the wazoo. You've seen what this team does when they don't win. They do some crazy shit. And Mitch Marner needs to understand that if he cannot live up to the expectations in the playoffs, they will find a way to pressure him out. There will be a Mitch Marner move down the line. Listen, you added Mitch Marner to this team. You're really banking on Mitch Marner being that elite level talent he's been for his career in both the regular season and the playoffs. It's cup or bust. This is one of those teams that has also been that cup or bust category, and I think closer to the beginning of the year, I probably will do maybe like a tier list of some sort almost, where I will look at all the teams in what bracket they are in terms of how close to the cup they are. But this is going to be one of those teams that is they are right at the point where they can win a Stanley Cup. This is a win the cup or it's a failure season for this team. Because this team has too much talent on it not to win the cup. Another team that gets a player like Marner at a cheaper contract because of the state income tax thing is also interesting to me. Just saying, it is a thing. It is a thing. But Mitch Marner going to Vegas, it's the biggest move of the offseason. It should be treated as such. And again, if Mitch Marner can figure it out in the playoffs, if Mitch Marner can perform on a playoff level in the playoffs, in that big time scenario, like he did at the Four Nations, it's like that team can win the cup. That team will make it out of the Western Conference. If Mitch Marner can be Mitch Marner in the regular season, in the playoffs, if he can play up to that potential, the Vegas Golden Knights will go to the Stanley Cup final this year. I don't know who they'll meet, but they will go to the final. Second last team to talk about is a team that did not all that much, the Washington Capitals. They really ran it back. They lost a couple depth pieces, Andrew Mangiapane being one of them, but nobody too major to their success is gone. They traded a second and a third for Justin Sordeef. I mentioned how that's great asset management from the side of the Florida Panthers. I don't get this deal for the Washington Capitals. I don't. They did sign him to a cheap 2-year contract, which is cool, I guess. But he's played 4 NHL games and he scored 1 goal. Like, you are trading a second and a third for a guy who was a 3rd-round pick all that time ago, who has no proven track record in the NHL. He had a good AHL year, but that means nothing. No offense, but it really does mean nothing. This is the NHL. If Justin Sordeef does not show up and play to like a 20-goal, 20-assist type pace, or does not show up and play really, really damn good defensively. If Justin Sortieff does not contribute to the Washington Capitals in a meaningful way this year, this is going to look like one of the worst trades of the offseason. It will genuinely look like that. Like, if it does not work out, it is utterly unjustifiable. That's the truth behind it. So, hopefully Washington knows what they're doing with that one, but I'm a little concerned with that move. Other than that, in terms of contracts, Declan Chisholm, they added him via trade, but it was such a small move that I didn't even bother adding in. I believe it was just a body swap with a draft pick involved. They add him, they signed him to a contract, $1.6 million per year for the next 2. And then they signed Martin Fehervey to an extension for $6 million per year for the next 7 years, kicking in next season. That's a good contract for Martin Fehervey. It is. That's a good deal. I take a look at that. I think that that's a fine contract for him. Like compared to what some of the other defensemen, Provorov and Gavrikov, are making, that's a good rate for Martin Fehervey. Listen, question with this team is simple. Can they do what they did last year again? Because I did not think the Washington Capitals were going to be as good as they were last year. I think that they were the surprise of the league. It wasn't that they had a bad team. It's just that they had the same core that hadn't really done a whole lot the year before. I really thought that was the year where Washington was just going to fall to being like a middle of the bottom, meaning like 11th or 12th team in the East. The fact that they did as well as they did was surprising to me, and the fact that we are sitting here thinking, okay, are they going to do it again? It's an interesting conversation. Ovi's probably going to slow down now that he's hit the goal record. You'd have to imagine a lot of the guys that played last year at career season levels probably won't replicate that. I don't know if they can do what they did last year. I don't know if they can, but we'll have to see. We'll have to watch them actually play again before we can get that notion. I mean, for all we know, they double down and do even better than they did last year, but I doubt that happens. I doubt that they do better. I don't think that they improved. I don't think they improved in free agency. And finally, the Winnipeg Jets. Now, obviously, it drops midway through me recording this that Nikolai Ehlers leaves to go to Carolina. You don't have him anymore. This team didn't make any trades. They just made a couple signings. They added Jonathan Toews, 1 year, $2 million. Could be $7 million with performance bonuses throughout the season. I'm interested to see how Jonathan Toews does after not playing hockey for a couple years. Like, it's been a while since he's played. Can he still perform at the level he was before? That's why that contract's structured that way. And Gustav Nyquist is signed for 1 year, $3.25 million. He is meant to be the Ehlers replacement, but he's just not as good as Ehlers. Listen, it is hard to imagine the Winnipeg Jets being back where they were last season without having Ehlers. That is a big part of what made their offense successful when he was playing, and the fact that they don't have that now is going to hurt them. I think they're still a playoff team, but I don't think that they're going to recapture President's Trophy status, and in terms of the playoffs, we saw that this team in President's Trophy form lost in the second round. In a Western Conference where the Vegas Golden Knights are poised to take a step up, in a Western Conference where Dallas is going to be good again, Colorado is going to want to try and take a run again. It's really hard to imagine that a Jets team without Nikolai Ehlers can make it out of the second round if they make it there. It's honestly hard for me to say that they will make it out of the first round depending on how things play out. If they don't win the division, if they have to go up against the other team in the Central, either Colorado or Dallas, if they have to go up against one of those two teams, it's hard to say that they would beat them. So I'm interested to see where the Jets go. I also want to throw this out here before I wrap up this video and try to put my voice on some sort of a life preserver. There's going to be a lot of trades. I mentioned a few people who could be traded throughout. I left a few names off. It's been reported now that the free agency's kind of shrunk up. Teams are not happy with where they are. To get better, you're going to have to make trades. There's going to be a lot of teams, I think, that want to sell pieces off to try and tank for Gavin McKenna. I think there will be teams that try to do that. And I think there's teams that are going to try and add because they kind of see there are a lot of teams in the same spot that want to get ahead of each other. And I think there's going to be a lot of teams that try to make an add or two. So I wouldn't be surprised if in a couple of weeks when we do our second episode of this, I've got a boatload of trades to talk about. It's basically, it might be Trade Center 2.0 for all I know. But out of the sanctity of my voice and your ears, I am going to leave it at that. I would like to thank you all, if you've made it this far, for watching the first episode of this podcast show, whatever you want to call it. We will be back in a couple of weeks probably with a second episode. I have a couple different ideas for episodes I want to do over the summer, a couple concepts I haven't really seen be explored on a grand stage yet. So we'll have to see how that goes. I also, by the way, don't imagine that they will be as long as this one was. This was a long one because we had a lot to cover. We had a lot of teams, a lot of players to talk about, and this was with me rushing through the end because of my voice. But yeah, this is going to be it's going to be an interesting summer, and I also think that this show is going to be a fun one for me to do. And I'm really excited to see what I can put out there in the future. I thank you all. Whether you're watching, whether you have this on in the background and you're listening, thank you all for having this on. Thank you all for hearing my dumb, stupid face talk about hockey for 2 hours. Thank you all for watching. I will see you all next time. Goodbye for now.